Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. Yep, this is the video I was posting page count screenshots about, and I think I should have asked for ideas for a long video before I started. Some of the ideas y'all threw out there were great. Alas, I'm just hopping on the Aonishiki content train and using it as an excuse to get back in the breakdown groove. I knew there'd be a good amount to discuss just due to the length and activity of his fights, but I definitely did not expect this much. Fortunately for us, Aonishiki's such a great guy, he gave us a nice curve of things to talk about from day 1 to day 15. We can learn just by going in order. A few things before we start. First, do me a favor, hit the like button. I rarely ask for this, but it does help spread the video in the algorithm, and I really want this one getting traction. If you're not subscribed, I'm not going to ask you to do that yet. Get far enough into the video to feel like it's definitely worth it. Second, after a long injury hiatus, which I think we sumo fans can certainly appreciate, channel artist Yuria is back with our newest sumo kitten, Aonishiki. The new mug celebrates one of his epic victories over Yokozuna Hoshoryu on one side and his Ozeki promotion on the other. As always, they're available in 3 sizes, and if you'd be interested in having this design on something else, a shirt, a print, a pillow, whatever, just leave a comment and let us know. The mugs are kind of our thing, but it's not difficult to add a design to different types of merch. And finally, regarding the video, we've added these handy little pointer guys to help you keep track of what's happening and where to focus. Veteran sumo fans might not need them, but these breakdowns are designed as a teaching tool, and I want to minimize the chance of newer fans getting lost. Plus, if nothing else, they should help everyone maintain focus. It's a pretty long video, and not in the sharpest resolution, so the less squinting needed the better. Oh, and if the sound seems scuffed in a few spots, it is. I discovered making a video this long requires not just multiple recording sessions, but inevitably some retakes, and the retakes had a few tech issues. It shouldn't make the video harder to enjoy, but all the same, apologies in advance. Okay, let's talk about Aonishiki's Kyushu Championship. I'm gonna use this first match with Kirishima to point out some of Aonishiki's core tactics in order to streamline discussion of later fights. Aonishiki's more willing than most to change his game plan based on the opponent, but there are certain tactics he uses consistently enough to consider them the foundations of his style. First is the tachi. Coming off the line, he stays low and gets his arms out past his head. This position serves a few purposes. 1. Being so bent over keeps his belt further from the opponent. 2. Whether he pushes out or keeps his arms bent to absorb contact, the extended arms in his bent position make it essentially impossible for the opponent to reach his belt. And 3. The position is very effective at letting him get his head under his opponent's. Head under jaw is a strong position in most grappling sports, but few sumo athletes prioritize it like Aonishiki. Now let's watch what Kiri does. A lot of rikishi start in a somewhat upright stance on the tachi. In those cases, Aonishiki automatically gets his head lower than his opponent's. But here, Kiri begins at about the same level and off to the side. So how can Aonishiki get that position he wants from here? Let's switch to the side angle. Their heads are on the same horizontal plane, but Aonishiki's reaching out with both hands, whereas Kiri's reaching down with his left with his right arm up and bent. Kiri knows full well Aonishiki wants that lower head position, so his goal here is to hit Aonishiki under the chin with the right forearm and push up on his body with the left hand. He wants to deny that head low position and get a push going, which is the only semi-consistent weakness Aonishiki's ever shown.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
As we see a few frames later, the forearm shiver completely fails. Not only does he not land the forearm where he wants it, it ends up over Aonishiki's head with his elbow further ahead than the rest of his arm. Unfortunately, we don't have an angle on the other side for a better view. If we go forward a bit though, after Kiri's pulled his arm back, Aonishiki's left hand is up. What we can take from this is that Aonishiki attacked Kiri's wrist and forearm with his hand, blunting their impact, and bumped Kiri's arm up enough for the impact of his face to shove it over top of his head and shoulder. Pushing the arm up also forces Kiri's body up, which lets Aonishiki take the lower position that he wants. This is excellent defense. Kiri's done something different with his right arm on the tachi in each of their 3 fights, so Aonishiki couldn't have prepared for this exact move. He had to be ready for a lot of possibilities, but still reacted quickly enough to wreck the attack on that side. Kiri's left hand is more successful, landing directly on Aonishiki's body. And here there's another part of Aonishiki's tachi we should mention. Right after initial contact, Aonishiki usually tries to land a nodowa, a throat hold, with his right hand. If he can't quite get that, he at least wants to plant his hand on his opponent's face. Here he hits Kiri's shoulder, then his hand goes up and in because he's going for the face and throat. In this case though, Kiri's left lands in Aonishiki's armpit, letting him force the arm away before Aonishiki can find the target. We'll get a better look at that nodowa in later fights. The left hand under the armpit not only throws off the throat hold, it also lets Kiri push Aonishiki up a bit. Considering the right forearm completely missed, Kiri doesn't do a bad job of getting Aonishiki lifted up and out of his comfort zone. Kirishima is, in fact, pretty good at this sumo thing. Alright, Aonishiki's been pushed up and his right hand slipped off Kiri's shoulder. However, compared to Kiri, his weight is more forward and his head is lower. It's been okay position. He swoops his right hand up and around, pushing off Kiri's upper arm. On the left, we can see he's pushed off Kiri's shoulder on that side. He reaches out for Kiri's face, but his fingers brush by. It's slightly too far for good contact, plus Kiri parries the arm away. Then he ducks his head back in, right hand on Kiri's shoulder. We can't see where the left lands, but when Kiri reacts by throwing both arms up and Aonishiki's arms go up as well, we can assume Aonishiki's left hand was on Kiri's upper arm or shoulder. After this sequence, we've seen enough to introduce Aonishiki's second core tactic. Watch where Aonishiki targets his hands. On the tachi, it's Kiri's incoming arm and his shoulder. After that, the upper arm and the opposite shoulder. Then comes the face swipe with the rest of Kiri's body out of reach. And after that's defended, he gets his hands back on Kiri's upper arms. His opponent's arms are the main target of his pushes and hand strikes. This is a key aspect of Aonishiki's style that's easy to miss. Other wrestlers do strike the arms sometimes, but eventually they target the body. After all, the body is what you need to push if you want to send your opponent back and out. But Aonishiki is content with these consistent attacks on his opponent's arms. Whether he knocks them offline or hits them directly and lessens their power doesn't matter. If the opponent can't put enough juice on their pushes, he just won't move very far. When I say it like that, it sounds like an obvious strategy, but there are risks to this approach. First and foremost, lessening the opponent's impact doesn't reduce it to zero. This is why Aonishiki frequently gets slid backwards to some degree in his fights, especially at the start. Against the top guys like Kirishima, he usually has to sacrifice some ring position in order to find the advantage he wants. It also requires very fast, accurate hands. If he misses once, or his opponent is faster than him, he can easily get popped backwards. That's why his kryptonite is still big, strong pushers. This strategy helps alleviate that issue to a degree, since accepting the backward slide in order to create an opening is better than standing up to someone at the line and getting insta-blasted. But the bigger and stronger they are, the less room for error he has. I'll also note, although we see it less here, that Aonishiki does sometimes go for the face and neck, but he tends to only push the body when he's in tight. It's fairly rare that he extends his arms to strike the chest. Okay, moving along. Aonishiki reacts to Kiri's defense by swinging both arms around. The left stays with Kiri's right arm. His right, however, goes after Kiri's belt. If he can lock that in, he'll be in great shape. Kiri's fully aware of this though and uses that moment to shove Aonishiki back. Aonishiki wasn't being a total ding-dong here, but this was arguably a misplay. He commits to the belt attack before Kiri's hand lands on his shoulder, so it's understandable why he might view this as an opening. But Kiri's hand lands well before Aonishiki reaches his target. It's remarkable he comes as close to getting the belt as he does. In this moment, Aonishiki is as upright as he'll ever be and has lost ground to boot. But he's so stable in that L stance that he's able to get his body down before Kiri can take advantage, gets his arms low to brace, and, if necessary, defend his belt. Kiri gets his hands on Aonishiki's shoulders and pushes again. Even though Kiri is an outstanding grappler, he has noped out of that idea in this matchup and is happy to keep shoving. But Aonishiki's stability makes it so Kiri's next push sends Kirishima backwards. That takes us to aspect number 3 of Aonishiki's style. He does not allow himself to wind up at the Tawara. Plenty of guys try to stay mobile and not get stuck at the boundary, but many times they're also comfortable using the Tawara as a brace if they think it'll work better. Even Ura, whose calling card is mobility, will sometimes dig in and just let the Tawara stop his backward slide. Aonishiki wants no part of that. Here he digs in and turns things around when he still has over a foot of space between him and the rope. If he can't reverse the momentum so completely though, he'll do something else to get out of that position while he still has room to work with. We'll see more impressive examples of this later. Okay, the momentum has turned. Aonishiki takes a big step forward. This is kinda risky because he's essentially swinging his belt into a very grabbable position. Kiri sees it too and gets his hand down there immediately. His arm is pretty outstretched, and Aonishiki's left arm is somewhat trapped, unable to defend. It looks like this grab should be successful. As we see here though, he's wrapped around Aonishiki's upper arm, no belt. Again, the lack of a reverse angle sucks because we can't see exactly what happened. What we can see is Aonishiki coming up with a pretty good on-the-spot defense, banging his head into Kiri's shoulder. And we can tell this is on purpose because he turns his head into the shoulder. And why not? When you bang heads with these dudes all the time, shoulders must feel like pillows. It's possible Kiri still got his hand to the belt and simply couldn't secure the grab. That happens. But the headbutt to the shoulder, if nothing else, would have minimized the time Kiri had to take the belt. It's another way that attacking the arm minimizes the opponent's offense. Aonishiki has his left arm under Kiri's right, but Kiri has it locked up, so he doesn't make an attempt on the belt. Kiri's left hand kinda flails as he has a moment of, what do I do? He gets the left on Aonishiki's shoulder, but Aonishiki immediately grabs the back of his elbow to keep it in place and make it harder to push. Now they're at ring center again, but Kiri's the one going backwards. Not only that, he has to pull himself back even further to free himself from Aonishiki's control on his left arm. That's okay though. He immediately follows up with a push to Aonishiki's face before Aonishiki can counter on the other side. Except he doesn't gain any space, he pushes himself back yet again. Look, he starts pushing here, but his feet are here by the time Aonishiki's hand lands. And then Aonishiki sends him back even more. So Aonishiki's control tactics slowly move Kiri back, but then Kiri loses even more space because Aonishiki is a f***ing brick wall. It's almost unfair. Still, it's not over yet. Kiri super commits to the forward lean to resist the push. He gets his hands up, pushes back, and only in this moment uses the Tawara to brace. Even then, he doesn't rely on the Tawara very much. Like Aonishiki, he's trying to stage a defense before the boundary comes into play. And finally, he's able to stall Aonishiki's push. But Aonishiki looks ready for this as well. Once he can no longer push Kiri out, as soon as Kiri's momentum moves in his direction, he steps back. This has two effects. One, because Kiri had to overextend to turn the momentum, the quick step back prevents him from recovering his balance. Instead, he stumbles slightly into the now open space. And two, because his pushing left arm is still extended, Aonishiki can get a solid hold of it. The cherry on top is, as soon as Aonishiki's hand lands on his arm, Kiri pulls back to resist the arm drag he assumes is coming. Instead, Aonishiki gets his hand behind the elbow and shoves Kiri to the side where there's minimal resistance. All it takes is one forced step for Aonishiki to get behind Kiri and secure the Okuradashi win. To be clear, Kirishima did not make any real mistakes. On offense, it's easier to recognize that the push is over once your opponent hits the Tawara, since that's a built-in brace. Aonishiki never got that far, so there was no reason for Kiri to stop pushing forward. Then, once he was on the back foot, all his attempts to defend himself were logical. Aonishiki just had an answer for every single one. As a wise man once said,
"It is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose."
Wakamotoharu stepped up next. They last met on the final day of September, with Waka pulling off a surprising but very clean win. Something for Aonishiki to think about heading into this one. Aonishiki's Tachiai is nearly identical to what he did against Kirishima. For as much as we discussed this in the last fight, there's one other thing to note about this position. Normally, being bent so far forward makes one highly vulnerable to slapdown attacks. Aonishiki, however, has proven almost invulnerable to such tactics. Even when he lost to Kusano and Kotoshoho in July, they had to knock him off to the side before their slapdowns worked. At this point, basically no one tries it anymore. That's why I wanted to make sure I said it early in this breakdown in case anyone's like, why don't they just pull him down like happens to other guys? Anyway, on the Tachiai, Waka's attack is similar to Kiri's. His right arm is bent and his left swings low. However, Waka's more upright than Kiri because he's more grappling focused. If he can lift Aonishiki up while standing his ground, being more upright can help pull Aonishiki in and give Waka an easier time in taking the belt. Yes, this will also make it easier for Aonishiki to take his belt, but given how a lot of Aonishiki's fights go, it's not unreasonable to think that trading belt grips right away is better than letting Aonishiki work his way inside on his own terms. However, Aonishiki gets his arms up first, giving him a lot of resistance against the forearm push. He does get lifted up a bit as Waka pulls his right arm free, but Waka's even more upright, so he's likely fine with this. As they rise up, Waka's left hand lands on Aonishiki's body just like Kiri's did, but it's not as precisely targeted at the armpit. This gives Aonishiki a chance to land the Nodowa, forcing Waka to pull back and defend the hold. To Waka's credit, rather than battling to get the hand off his neck, he pops his hand up just a little as a feint. It's kinda risky because it's hard to do much when an opponent has this hold locked in, but if he puts his full strength into dislodging it, then he's just reacting to Aonishiki. He wants Aonishiki to react to him. Unfortunately, it looks like Aonishiki has a data feed tapped directly into his brain. Not only does Aonishiki release the hold by the time Waka finishes the feint, he gets his hand on Waka's shoulder before Waka can even start attacking the belt. In fairness, after losing to Waka's double belt grip, he probably expected a similar tactic this time, but to be that far ahead of Waka is wild. Nonetheless, Wakamotoharu makes some progress. He forces Aonishiki's arm up and gets his hand to the body. A few more inches and he can take the belt. Not only that, with their opposite stances, it'll be much easier for each of them to take the belt on the near side than the far side. Given their positions, Aonishiki's at greater risk despite his good defensive reactions thus far. He's got that right arm clamped down and his hands gripping Waka's triceps to stay safe. But Waka throws out some quality bait. He lifts his right side up, pulling Aonishiki with him. This lowers his left side, bringing the belt within easier reach. Aonishiki wants it, he's reaching for it, but he pulls back because if he reaches too far, Waka also gets his belt. So either he wasn't 100% sure he'd get the belt or he's heavily prioritizing belt defense. Once Waka slides him back a half step, Aonishiki forgets the temptation of the belt and commits to defense. He shifts to a neutral stance and drops his body a bit. Then he pivots left and snaps his right hip back. The hip snap is often used to break an opponent's belt grip, but we can see the moment before that Waka's left hand was definitely not on the belt. In this case then, it was probably done in part for belt safety, but also for Aonishiki to power himself out of a somewhat poor ring position and into a significantly better one. It looks good because it worked, but on paper at least, it's kind of a chancy move. Anytime you make a big move or get your side turned towards your opponent, there's a higher chance of something going very wrong. It's much more common for guys who want a better position to step around their opponent in a controlled manner. After watching enough of Aonishiki's fights though, I just don't think that's in his playbook. He wants to put juice in his moves like this and make it difficult for his opponents to react. Just show me you can stop me. Okay, Aonishiki improved his ring position with the hip snap. However, Waka is smart with his footwork. He's fought most of the match with his left foot forward. But as Aonishiki pivots around him, his right foot is in the center of the ring. If he steps back, he'll be the one with the poor ring position, so he keeps the right foot there and just shifts his stance. Aonishiki has the same idea in mind and slides his left foot forward to the middle of the ring. Here we're seeing how critical ring position is. Immediately after Aonishiki prioritized belt defense, he puts his left side and Waka's right closer together, making his belt easier to take. Waka accepts the invitation, going over the top for the belt. Doing this removes his control of Aonishiki's arm though, and Aonishiki retaliates by getting his own belt grip. This is something Aonishiki is more comfortable doing once he likes his position, for example with his head buried under his opponent's jaw. And now we get the UBD, the Ukraine booty drop. This was patented by Shishi as a pre-tachi-ai bounce, but Aonishiki frequently uses it to pull his opponents off balance. If the inability of opponents to push him down wasn't enough evidence of his absurd core strength, this should be. He steps right, widening his stance to help bring his center of gravity down. With Waka's left arm locked up, this 6-inch drop is all it takes to force Waka to move. The left hand on the belt pulls Waka to his right, and as Waka goes down and up, Aonishiki sticks with him, keeping his head on Waka's jaw. Wakamotoharu is a warrior, but this is a miserable position. Nonetheless, Waka does a good job skidding to a halt with his left foot still near the center of the ring. Aonishiki's definitely improved his position though. After a bit of a stall, Aonishiki pulls another UBD, this time leading to his classic Uchimuso technique. Notice that he steps and drops before the hand even touches. I've mentioned that the knee swat is more a distraction than anything because it's impossible to put much force on it, but only when I started this breakdown did I appreciate how much the initial shift plays into it. By forcing the opponent to move before the hand touches, the opponent has to deal with another source of resistance in the middle of trying to keep his balance. It doesn't take a lot of resistance in that position to screw him up. Also, can we take a moment to appreciate the whole setup? Aonishiki starts somewhat on the back foot, then fights his way to a relatively neutral position. Waka's keeping himself as centered in the ring as possible. Aonishiki uses the UBD to drag him over. Waka stays centered the only way he can by getting his left foot forward. So Aonishiki dragged him exactly into the position he needed to try the Uchi Muso. If you're thinking he couldn't have known exactly where Waka would end up, that is technically true. But as long as he got the first pull to work, this was Waka's best case scenario. Any other stance would have left Waka with his back more towards the boundary and thus open to a wider variety of attacks. The only way Waka could have avoided this was to not get moved in the first place. Best of luck with that. But Wakamotoharu is as steady as they come, plus he's fully aware of the maneuver at this point. Look how he hangs out in the position. He's not scared of the Uchimuso wolf. He's waiting for it. As soon as it comes, he bends with Aonishiki to defend it. And as soon as he's sure of his balance, he squeezes Aonishiki's left arm, lifts up on the other side, and presses his hips forward to drive Aonishiki back. Give Waka his flowers here. This was such a clean defense in transition, he had to have this planned and practiced. And yet, not only is he unable to get Aonishiki moving back, this opens the front of his belt to Aonishiki's right hand. His practiced counterattack has left him in a deeply problematic position. Aonishiki's left belt grip is under his right, which is an advantage, and Aonishiki's right front grip has his left hand trapped. He can't do anything with it in this position, but if he pulls it free, he loses what defense it provides and hands Aonishiki all the leverage. Now Aonishiki keeps his head buried against Waka's left arm. It matters less if he keeps his head against Waka's jaw here. He's in full push mode with the double belt grip, Waka's pretty upright, and this mostly eliminates Waka pulling off any power moves with that arm. Aonishiki uses the double grip to push Waka back. He pulls up with his right hand to raise Waka's center of gravity and make the push easier. But as Waka's feet hit the Tawara, Aonishiki makes a clear point of getting to Waka's right side, including wrapping his left hand around the back of Waka's belt. This appears to leave an avenue of escape to Waka's left. It may be unlikely Waka can get away, but it's still a path that didn't exist with the straight push. Plus, sliding the hand on the belt gives Waka a moment to potentially free himself. Again, it's unlikely, but it looks like Aonishiki opened himself to small risks where none had existed. So why do this? Part of it is almost certainly that Aonishiki isn't the biggest pusher in the world. With his right hand in front and his left to the side, this gives him a fairly natural move to his left. Once his hand is on the back of Waka's belt, he can yank Waka into his left leg. He has a solid enough position that Waka shouldn't be able to simply pull away, and if he can bend Waka's knee in a little, the force out becomes that much easier. However, given how good Aonishiki and Coach Ajigawa have been at preparing for his opponents, I find it just as likely that this was an opponent-specific choice. See, Wakamotoharu is a big fan of the Uchari. This is a throw done when pressed back against the Tawara. The wrestler essentially tries to throw his opponent past him before falling out himself. Waka hasn't officially won by Uchari since 2023, and it's dangerous if it doesn't work, but he's still liable to go for it if he thinks it's worth a shot. The way the Uchari works, having the opponent's belt helps a ton in creating leverage. Thus, with his right hand on Aonishiki's belt, Waka would have to throw Aonishiki over his left side. By getting on Waka's right side, Aonishiki makes a difficult throw nearly impossible. Waka still winds up making a pretty good attempt at it given the circumstances, but it's still not all that close. I'm sure Aonishiki would have preferred if Waka realized it wouldn't work and just stepped out, but whatever, he still won. The Hakuoho match was a close thing, and the reasons why start immediately. The Tachiai begins when Hakuoho absolutely does not touch the ground with his second hand. At best you can argue he barely grazes it with his fingers as he comes forward, but he's already coming forward. But hey, Hakuoho has a plan, and if the rules get in the way,
fuck you, blow me.
Aonishiki starts out pretty much the same way as the first two fights. Hakuoho uses his head start to full speed blast his face into the top of Aonishiki's head and slide up. Aonishiki's ability to get whacked like that and not budge is impressive, but it's also an offshoot of keeping his head low. Hakuoho might be near 400 pounds, but when the first point of impact is his face and Aonishiki blocks his arms, it's not easy to move someone. So even though this 100% should have been called a false start, I guess this kind of bullshit doesn't really matter if your opponent doesn't do anything smart with the advantage. Hakuoho reaches in with his left, but in this crouch, the bottom of Aonishiki's belt is wedged against his leg. Where Hakuoho's trying to get is literally unreachable. If he wants the belt, he needs to get further in so he can reach more around the side or back, and that's not happening. So he gets his hands on Aonishiki and just starts pushing with his legs. He doesn't even have both hands on the body. We can see the left hand is there, but the right is on Aonishiki's arm. And here, dear viewer, I must apologize for briefly misleading you. The bullshit head start does matter. Even though Hakuoho didn't take great tactical advantage of it, he's able to make this push work in part because he also got a momentum advantage, which has had Aonishiki sliding back this whole time. For his part, Aonishiki starts in an L stance, leaning in hard against the push. But you know the push is working when he can't hold the position. His feet slowly slide back, and he realizes he can't fully resist this attack. Hakuoho even sneaks his right arm down and in, so both hands are inside of Aonishiki's arms. Short of having the belt so you can pull your opponent's center of gravity up while pushing, this is as good a position as you could want. A common strategy in Aonishiki's position would be to slide to the Tawara, brace against it, and use it to push back or slide around the opponent. But as we discussed in the first two fights, Aonishiki is not going to wait until he's at the edge to make a move. When Hakuoho got his right hand inside, he improved his pushing position, but he left both of Aonishiki's arms free. So, in one coordinated motion, Aonishiki wraps his left arm around Hakuoho's head, steps forward with his left foot, and pulls Hakuoho hard to the right, using Hakuoho's trapped left arm as extra leverage. Every part of this move matters. Stepping back to pull the opponent into a throw is common, but Aonishiki doesn't have the space. He has to step forward to knock Hakuoho's right leg up as he pulls. It works though, and now Hakuoho's leg is just hanging in the air as he desperately tries to stay balanced on his left foot. At this point, with Hakuoho hanging on for dear life, Aonishiki looks like he very much has the advantage. Hakuoho, though, keeps shoving with his right arm and at least gives himself a chance of pushing Aonishiki over before he himself falls out. Given how hard he gets pulled and how quickly he goes from winning to barely on his toes, Hakuoho's ability to hang on to the extent he does is remarkable. It's close enough that it goes to replay, but Aonishiki is verified as the winner. But let's be real clear. As good as the throw was, Aonishiki does not want to be in this position. He didn't get lucky like Hakuoho would have won except for a slip. He was, however, very fortunate. With Wakamotoharu, we discussed the Uchari, the last-ditch attempt at a win, and this was essentially a different throw with the same goal. If Aonishiki hadn't nailed this move, he was on his way out. Working through the false start to still take the dub is impressive, or instant karma, but it could also give hope to some of Aonishiki's bigger opponents who push this way rather than with the arms out Onosato, Yoshi, Takayasu style. Against Takanosho, we get the first alteration to Aonishiki's tachiai. Rather than come in with his upper body essentially parallel to the floor, he's more upright this time and makes contact at closer to a 45-degree angle. We mentioned Wakamotoharu used a more upright stance because getting to the belt was the goal. Lo and behold, Aonishiki catches Takanosho coming in, pushes with the Nodowa, then misses the left to Taka's face. But he misses the face because Takanosho slides back. Screw the face then, Aonishiki's got the momentum. It's time to attack the belt. As a side note, Aonishiki strikes the neck to help push Takanosho back, but he doesn't try to maintain that hold on the throat. This is part of his strategy being focused on immediately getting the belt, but he does often stick to the throat for longer if he's able. Alright, Aonishiki's after the belt and he has no problem getting it. It's more than a simple belt grab too. Takanosho is so unable to defend himself here that Aonishiki actually steps around him. At Takanosho's side with the back of the belt in hand and a fresh Nodowa locked in place, this should be a nearly unlosable position for Aonishiki. He doesn't even have to work for the trip attempt, it's just there waiting to happen. To Takanosho's credit, even in this god-awful position, he fights through the trip and tries to get himself pointed towards Aonishiki again. But Aonishiki's doing his best Iron Man impression with the throat push, so Taka's low on options. Step 1 of any counterattack is getting Aonishiki's hand off his neck. If he can't do that, it's over. So he shoves upward on Aonishiki's arm. Aonishiki's good about staying in control, so rather than allow his arm to be pushed away, he pulls it back as soon as he cannot maintain the hold and throws it over Takanosho's shoulder. As Aonishiki's throat push is dislodged though, he also releases Takanosho's belt and gets that left hand pushing. On its own, releasing the belt to push is a somewhat common tactic. If a wrestler has trouble forcing his opponent out with his hand on the belt, he lets go so he can apply extra force to the body. However, Takanosho also has his forearm pressed on Aonishiki's arm. That gives Aonishiki even more reason to let go, since the forearm block reduces how much he can pull up on the belt. But the timing works out very poorly for our protagonist. Losing the throat hold allows Takanosho to evade before the left hand even gets to his chest. Once Takanosho is roughly perpendicular to the rope, Aonishiki's attack is done, so he shifts to control. He locks up Takanosho's left arm and he really wants that belt back but misses the grab. Takanosho's not in a bad position all things considered, but he prioritizes getting his arm free and pulls back to yank it loose, which sends his momentum the way Aonishiki wants it to go. Aonishiki stays on him, leaving no room to think or breathe. Takanosho has no plan here. He tries a slapdown, if you can even call it that. From all the energy he put into it, it's pretty clear he knew the game was up. Once again, Aonishiki knew what he wanted to do with his opponent. With the others, he was confident he could stay at arm's length until the time was right. With Takanosho, whose only real weapon is a gigantic pushing attack, his primary goal was to get inside and stay inside. Even when he goofed and let Taka off the rope, he was able to do that. Fortunately, he wasn't fighting someone with a lot of tricks who could take advantage of that momentary escape. Welcome to Day 5 and Wakatakakage. Aonishiki gets his arms out as usual, but since his tachi isn't especially aggressive, Waka had to get a good pull on the head and a swat on the ass to make it work. As we can see on the side view replay, this wasn't a henka where the opponent races by. Aonishiki's momentum stopped for a moment before Waka escorted him past. It's a sign Aonishiki should be relatively good against henka attempts, but he's obviously not invulnerable. And it's worth acknowledging this henka took a little more than just getting out of the way for it to work. None of this is to convince anyone to like or dislike the move, there's just nothing else to discuss. And going by a lot of comments, I have the feeling a lot of you don't want to talk about this anyway, so let's just move on. Day 6, Pinky Boy versus the new hotness. I imagine most people expected a blowout, but oh baby, this was a fun one. Ura races in on the tachi, and even though Aonishiki stays low, he really gets his arms out there this time. He doesn't have to worry about absorbing a giant's weight. He's more intent on keeping Ura at bay. It makes sense. This is a relatively rare situation where he has the size advantage, and he undoubtedly knows that letting Ura get too far inside is the best way to lose. It's hard to completely stop Ura from getting his hands on you though, and Ura lands that left hand on Aonishiki's body. He steps in enough to give Aonishiki a solid shove, but one of the downsides to really getting your legs into a push like this is that you're not moving forward to follow up. Let's be honest, a lot of us saw Ura push Aonishiki back even just that little bit and went, oh man, he's doing work, he can do this, but Aonishiki is fully in control of himself. As soon as he gets back in and starts pushing, the momentum reverses. He does a good job of swinging his arms away from Ura's downward parry and getting them right back to Ura's shoulders. I mentioned Aonishiki likes to target his opponent's arms. In this matchup, with Ura attacking his hands, he makes a seamless adjustment, consistently aiming for Ura's shoulders to create an actual push. Also, remember how I used Ura as an example of someone comfortable using the Tawara? Here we go. Aonishiki's got him moving, so he takes a stable position but otherwise lets it happen. He slides and slides, and as soon as his foot touches the Tawara, he drops his weight and gets a quick launch off it. But the thing about being comfortable with it is that an opponent like Aonishiki knows it's coming. Once Ura hits the last slide, look, Aonishiki doesn't bend him back against the hay like a lot of guys. Instead, he stops chasing and waits for Ura to come back in. He catches Ura on the shoulders again, and instead of Ura finding any real form of attack, they bounce off each other. Ura hits the Tawara again, but Aonishiki's further away, so he simply steps off it and re-engages. It's more of the same for a bit. Aonishiki keeps hitting the shoulders or the upper chest if Ura is more upright. Ura keeps dipping and dodging, but Aonishiki's accuracy keeps him at bay. Okay, pause here. We know Ura is comfortable using the Tawara as a brace. In this spot, his right foot is back. Ergo, if he hits the Tawara, it'll be with his right foot. That's obvious, but what matters is that it somewhat dictates the directions in which he can push off with any force. When his foot lands again here, that'll naturally direct him either straight ahead or to his left. As such, he puts his left hand on Aonishiki's face to get an extra push in that direction. But Aonishiki's right hand is already on Ura's face, and more importantly, it's inside of Ura's left. This gives him all the leverage, and his neck push staggers Ura. This is the time to attack. It's hard to get Ura off balance, and he wants to take advantage of it. However, in that moment it takes Aonishiki to plant his right foot and rush in, Ura recovers. The momentum still carries him to his right, but he has the balance to control his movement. So he rolls with the momentum and fully dodges Aonishiki's charge. This is a phenomenal move. If Aonishiki hadn't been able to swing his left arm out to ward Ura off, Ura would have likely stepped in and introduced him to a couple fans in the first row. Now this might seem like an error from Aonishiki, but bear in mind this is his first fight with Ura. Sometimes the reputation and the tape aren't enough to prepare you for what someone with a particular skill set can actually do. In any case, Aonishiki stays under control and follows Ura across the ring. He pushes as Ura plants his feet and drops his head, which makes him partially miss. Instead, he braces his forearms against Ura's shoulders. He transitions very smoothly into a quick pull down to bring Ura closer for a belt grab. As soon as Ura's hands get to Aonishiki's shoulders for the push though, Aonishiki abandons the belt attempt and keeps his arms up with Ura's. The priority remains the priority. Keep him away. Don't let him get inside on his terms. After the push-off, they get head-to-head again. We can't see Aonishiki's right hand here, but it's going up towards Ura's shoulder. Meanwhile, the left is going back for the belt. But keeping Aonishiki off his belt is Ura's priority, so he makes a big step to his left to keep his right side safe and give him room to wrap up Aonishiki's left arm. On top of that, he wraps his left arm around Aonishiki's back. Their feet are much closer on that side, making the belt grab easier for each of them, but if Ura goes for the belt, he'll be doing it with his momentum. Aonishiki would be doing it against his momentum. Thus, this move forces Aonishiki to lock up Ura's arm and defend himself. Now they each have the other's left arm trapped. This is a somewhat unusual spot for Aonishiki. Ura's not an opponent where he's likely to get the lower head position, but they're on the same plane. That is, Ura doesn't have the advantage either, so now that they've stopped circling, Aonishiki can take the relatively easy belt grab. With a height disadvantage and an opponent who's not making a mistake, Ura can't match it. Even with all that in mind, Aonishiki is very careful to make sure he'll get the belt when he goes for it, and he immediately forces his weight down to eliminate any chance of a counter grab. Once Aonishiki's in this position, especially after a long, tiring match, Ura simply is not getting away. One thing that's often difficult to tell in sumo is if someone purposely tries to create a battle of attrition. Aonishiki has plenty of physical advantages over Ura, but he showed a ton of respect to Ura's strengths and only let them come into play with the one dodge. So if his goal was to keep Ura at arm's length, was he simply looking for an opening, or was the plan to use his presumably greater stamina and just keep the match going until Ura was too tired to defend himself? It's probably a mix of both. When he staggered Ura, he didn't hang back, he pounced. He's always looking for an opening, and if it comes sooner rather than later, great. However, if ya haven't noticed, Aonishiki also likes long fights. The average sumo match is about 6 seconds. 8 of his wins in November went over 10 seconds. This was 22. On the flip side, his 3 losses only lasted 9 seconds combined, and the way too close Hakuoho win was 8. Given Ura's tricksiness and the fact it was their first meeting, and Ura looks like a very good candidate to drag into an attrition fight. Day 7 was another tough one for our protagonist. Takayasu was more aggressive across the whole basho than he's been in ages, and that's the approach which has most consistently given Aonishiki problems. Lo and behold, Takayasu comes in with his full weight on the tachiai. Aonishiki gets his hands into him first, and for just a moment we can see his right hand go for the throat. But Takayasu throws his arms up and sends Aonishiki back along with the Nodowa attempt. This is very similar to the start against Kirishima. Unlike Kiri though, Takayasu gets an immediate face push and the bear paws start coming. Aonishiki counters with hands to the body. This looks like it goes against what I said earlier, that he almost always goes after the opponent's arms. But this actually is trying to counteract Takayasu's hands. Aonishiki is a couple inches shorter, so in a straight reach contest, he's not going to get to Papa Bear if Papa Bear gets his arms fully extended. He can, however, strike under the arms, keeping Takayasu's body from rotating into the strike and taking a lot of the oomph out of it. That's easier said than done, of course. He still slides back, and when he leaves his right arm out, then pushes with the left, Takayasu shoves both arms aside to get in closer. But this puts Aonishiki's head against his jaw, which plays right into Aonishiki's strategy. Aonishiki gets his hands on Takayasu's sides, takes a strong L stance, and that halts Takayasu's momentum. He also pushes up on Papa Bear's rib meat in order to keep all 400 of those pounds from leaning in on him. It may not look like it, but right now Aonishiki is in survival mode. His back is closer to the Tawara than he'd like, and his immediate goal is to not let Takayasu get another push going. At the same time, Takayasu's right arm is under Aonishiki's left, and he's trying to lift Aonishiki up so he's easier to push. But Aonishiki makes a little progress and slides Takayasu back a few inches. We've seen him in positions like this before. This is where he usually starts turning things in his favor. Except when Takayasu hops back, Aonishiki steps forward with his left foot, but the right doesn't follow. This narrows his stance, reducing his stability. So when Takayasu lifts up again, he's not in a balanced enough position to hold his ground. He has to shift his right foot over to regain the proper stance. But then his left foot fades in again. With Takayasu still pushing, Aonishiki has to hop over to recover his balance, and again just to get a couple extra inches of space. Takayasu is staying with him though. Aonishiki should be 100% f***ed here. Even though he's not gonna wait until he's at the edge to make a move, Takayasu's arms are on both sides of his torso, which should make escape nearly impossible. And yet, he pulls a fast one on Papa Bear and gets out. How the hell did he do this? Well, he hops, and digs his feet in. The only direction he can go is to his left, although he's balanced enough that it's hard to blame Takayasu for not noticing this. He plants his right foot in the dirt and his left on the Tawara, and uses both along with a left arm scoop and a push down to the right to get out of there. On top of the maneuver, he had to get his feet moving immediately. Takayasu kept up in terms of not losing contact, but Aonishiki still is faster. That gave him a very tiny window where he could take advantage of Takayasu not being quite close enough to stop him. He also had to be strong enough to get out from inside of Papa Bear's right arm, which is a feat in and of itself. This general type of escape, trying to pull the pusher by, isn't that unusual, but when a good pusher has that rib control, it doesn't work very often. That's even more true with someone as strong as Takayasu. Finally, and I admit this is a little more speculative, having one foot on the Tawara and one off, but pushing off the ground rather than the Tawara is not a common angle of movement. At least, it's not one I've noticed much. The Tawara is such a firm brace that, in general, wrestlers want to push off that like a sprinter in the blocks. Odd metaphor, but you get what I mean. Aonishiki springing away at that fairly extreme angle with power may have caught Takayasu off guard. Regardless, that didn't win Aonishiki the fight. It barely kept him in the fight. He doesn't exactly escape clean. He stumbles out and barely recovers before Takayasu's hands land on his shoulders and the paws start coming again. He resists momentarily, but he can't keep taking hands like this. So he grabs Takayasu's left arm, steps away, and pulls him by. Takayasu recovers, and when Aonishiki buries his face in Papa Bear's left shoulder, this looks like his steadiest position of the match. But Takayasu sees the belt open over the top and takes it. He's doing everything right. Now Takayasu goes for the Uwatanage, but it doesn't come all that close to working. Aonishiki resists it so fully that if you've watched the sport for a while, it probably seems obvious he's hanging onto Takayasu's belt. And if he's got the belt, it doesn't make the Uwatanage a bad idea, just a less good one. So this could be seen as Takayasu's first suboptimal decision in the match. But look here. In this frame, mid-throw, we see Aonishiki's hand roaming free, unattached to anything. That means when Takayasu committed to this throw, Aonishiki did not have his belt and he'd probably get it given time. So this too was a good idea from Papa Bear. From the side angle, we can see how barely Aonishiki is able to hook his fingers into the belt mid-throw. For him to stuff the throw so thoroughly with only this much leverage, stability, and finger strength off the charts. Now, if we want to be hypercritical, we could say Takayasu should have let go of the attempt here. But sometimes guys win with this throw by being stubborn and dragging the opponent along until they go down. Plus, it's been a pretty long match, so Takayasu overcommitting to this isn't all that surprising. He wants it to be over. But it lets Aonishiki get planted on his side, pull him over that left knee, and even then Aonishiki has to hang on until Takayasu steps out first. This was an outstanding effort by Takayasu, combined with a couple of small but critical footwork errors from Aonishiki. It took every physical tool Aonishiki had to squeak out the win. If Papa Bear keeps putting him through these kinds of battles, and especially if he can keep forcing mistakes, he will pick up some dubs in the matchup. Day 8. Oho. Oh, Oho. Like Hakuoho, Oho is yet another wrestler who bonks his face off Aonishiki's head on the Tachiai. Seriously, that cannot be comfortable. Not only that, by sticking his face right there, he's asking Aonishiki to grab him by the neck. You want to know why Oho's such a disappointment? Because he's the one who doesn't watch the f***ing tape. Anyway, Aonishiki keeps him at bay with the Nodowa and leaves it there until Oho commits to defending it. Once Oho does that, he pulls his arm back before Oho has any chance to control it, then gets his head inside and pinches in on Oho's left arm when Oho defends his belt. Oho's not directly in front of Aonishiki. His feet are positioned roughly so Aonishiki's front foot is between them. At this little bit of an angle, Oho's able to use his higher position to push down. If Aonishiki had kept his right arm against Oho's left, he may have gotten staggered, but he pulls it free and not much happens. After that, Oho looks to push. Aonishiki knows full well this is what Oho wants. Oho beat him with a throw in September, but that was a big heave-ho from a position that should normally be fine for Aonishiki. He's not worried Oho's suddenly gonna change strategies and go for it again. Why would he be? Oho doesn't watch the tape. So, as Oho rises up, even though Aonishiki's hands are at Oho's shoulders and he could push if he wanted, he swings down and blocks Oho's arm coming up. A few frames later, we can see Aonishiki's left arm inside of Oho's right, blocking him off on that side as well. Now he's so far inside, Oho cannot push with those hands. Both of Aonishiki's hands land on Oho's body, whereas Oho's hands are on his head, and even Oho knows nothing's happening here. He doesn't try a pull down or even a push off with his left forearm. He's just getting backed up, trying to find a position where he can do anything. And as if Aonishiki wasn't controlling the fight well enough, he grabs Oho's left arm and hangs onto it. He pulls Oho around, no doubt hoping to maintain this side position, but when Oho swings in towards him, he's content to let it go. If he really clung to the arm, he probably could have maintained that side position. But if he'd done that and swung with Oho to stay on his side, he'd end up close to the Tawara and vulnerable to a counterattack. By letting go, he stays centered in the ring, and he's also able to use the moment Oho pulls his arm free to attack. Or that's the intent anyway. When Oho frees his arm, Aonishiki pushes with his left, but that puts Oho slightly too far away. If Aonishiki goes after him, Oho has enough space to potentially escape. Oho's also at a better range in this spot since he's taller, and Aonishiki doesn't want to walk into a giant shove. Instead, he manages to pressure Oho without overcommitting. When he drops his head, Oho's only push targets are the tops of his shoulders. He knows that's where Oho has to put his hands, so when Oho pushes him, his hands are right there to shove Oho's arms and reduce the force applied. It's not perfect, so he does get stood up a bit, but he immediately ducks his head back down. Oho pushes again, Aonishiki parries again. The main thing for Aonishiki is to not leave his chest open to attack. That's what'll really get him in trouble. That being said, Oho is sliding Aonishiki back and he's running out of space. So after this second push, he ducks inside quickly before the next push can land. This gets Oho's arm stuck in a bent position, preventing the push at all. That in turn allows Aonishiki to attack the belt since he doesn't have to actively defend himself in this moment. He misses the belt because Oho drops his hips back, but that's fine. Oho moving backwards is what he wants. But with his butt back, Oho gets a right forearm push and a left face shove, halting Aonishiki's momentum. This is just size and power speaking. It's also why Oho's able to keep hanging around the high ranks even though he never watches the f***ing tape. Now Aonishiki makes a mistake. Ducking his head in, that's fine. Again, it gives Oho less space for his arms to work, but he's never getting the belt in this position. And the one time Aonishiki overextends rather than defend against the push, Oho gets some work done. Push with the right, push with the left, right hand on the neck. Aonishiki's getting his weight forward as best he can, but he can't stabilize his front foot. He's hanging in because he's a tough dude with strong fundamentals, but this was definitely not in the game plan. Here's how he turns it around though. Step 1, push Oho's arm up off his neck and hold it. One of the channel's core statements on sumo is don't leave your arm out there. In fairness to Oho, his hand isn't on Aonishiki's neck for long before it gets parried. He didn't get greedy. But Aonishiki, who's always cognizant of parry attempts and gets his arm out of there before he loses control of it, turns that idea around and holds Oho's arm in the air. Now it's Aonishiki's right hand versus Oho's left. That sounds like an even fight, but it's not. Oho's left is already to Aonishiki's body in a continuation of the push, but his right arm getting held in the air takes all the steam out of it. Meanwhile, because Oho is attacking, Aonishiki's right hand is free to sneak in and land firmly on Oho's jaw. And here we see how useful it was to keep Oho's right arm in the air. Aonishiki's hand is at Oho's throat. Oho is pulling his left arm back after the push. Oho's right arm, finally free, swipes down at Aonishiki's. But now Aonishiki's hand is jammed right up in there, and Oho can't free himself by pulling down because his own chest fat is helping keep the hand lodged in place. From the time we see Aonishiki's hand on Oho's neck to the time the right arm lands is just over 1/10 of a second. It takes Oho longer than that to free his arm from that high hold. If he hadn't gotten stuck there, he likely could have knocked away the throat grab before it had a chance to affect him. After that, Oho tries to wrap up Aonishiki's right arm. For this to work, you have to grab above the elbow, and it's arguable if Oho's ever in position to do that. But Aonishiki's face shove throws him way off of having any chance of landing the move. Oho's lost all defensive coordination. This probably has nothing to do with not watching the f***ing tape, but I kinda wanna blame it on that anyway. Aonishiki gets a little unlucky here. He steps in, plants the left foot, and turns, but his foot slips at the exact moment Oho is most off balance. This sends his weight further forward than he wants and gives Oho an opportunity to pull him by for the miracle victory. But Aonishiki gets his right arm around Oho's side, preventing escape, the idea we discussed in the Takayasu fight. The left hand to the back of the knee is just a bit of victory insurance. One major takeaway from this fight is how Aonishiki's overall preparation serves him well. When he goes in with that early throat hold, the opponent is gonna defend it, so he makes sure to keep his arm under his own control. Throat holds suck when they're on you and will almost always be targeted right away. As such, any wrestler who's going to use that tactic needs to know what they're going to do against all kinds of defenses. Oho didn't do that, and it cost him his best chance at the win. This fight is also a reminder on the importance of ring position. We've talked about how Aonishiki escapes danger by actively defending or counterattacking before he's stuck on the rope. I'm not going to fault Oho for not doing that here because he obviously didn't expect to get his head snapped like that, and once he recovered he was just on the Tawara. But if Oho had been able to make that move with an extra foot of space to work with, there's a good chance he would have gotten away and still had at least a chance of victory. And some guys simply wait too long to make that kind of move even when they do have space. Finally, again with Aonishiki's finger strength, he snaps Oho's head to the side without any of his palm touching Oho's face. Maybe the pads below the fingers at most. That is ridiculous. The Hiradoumi match was surprisingly good relative to what I think most people expected going in. Before we start though, there were comments from a coach on Japanese TV after the basho that Aonishiki likes to start with his hands down and react to the opponent starting the fight. One way of throwing Aonishiki off, he surmised, was to beat him to the spot and make him start the fight. Hiradoumi likes to do the same thing, but here Aonishiki's already crouched and getting his hands down while Hiradoumi is still standing up. So Aonishiki looks well aware of the benefit of throwing off an opponent in this way, and also like he has no intention of letting someone else do it to him unless they race to the line. As for the Tachiai itself, Hiradoumi, king of the false starts, finds a new way to pull one off. Well, not a new one. Remember Hakuoho's non-touch? Hiradoumi swipes the idea, but he's a little smarter about it. Rather than keep one hand down, then wave the other one through the air, which should be easier to spot, Hiradoumi doesn't put either hand down. That way, when he tilts forward, he touches with one hand but not the other. The false start is better hidden, but he still gets a jump on Aonishiki. Look how far forward he is by the time Aonishiki has barely moved. Hiradoumi, though, doesn't have the same major size advantage as Hakuoho. He gives up a little size to Aonishiki like Ura, but combine his upright aggressive style with the head start, and even though Aonishiki absorbs his initial push attack, Hiradoumi does slide him back. This initial contact is interesting though. Aonishiki, for once, is the one blocked off from getting what he wants. His head's low, his hands are flying in towards Hiradoumi's upper chest, but Hiradoumi straight blocks Aonishiki's right hand with his left. This is really impressive. For one, Hiradoumi brings his head to the side of Aonishiki's. This brings him closer, giving him less space to make the block. Add to that, coming in at Tachi speeds, even if you know exactly what your opponent's doing, it's easy to miss this block if the opponent's hand moves just a couple inches to the side. But Hiradoumi keeps his left arm back. That way it's not apparent he's going for this block until he actually does it, and Aonishiki has no reason to alter his approach angle. Hiradoumi also twists his right side up, denying Aonishiki control of either his arm or his body. This wrecks Aonishiki's initial attack. Plus, with the aggressive block, Hiradoumi is able to extend while Aonishiki has to get his hands free. And as all this happens, Aonishiki keeps sliding back. Aonishiki finally stops his momentum with a tiny backwards hop. Yes, he gives up a little more ground, but if that's what it takes to dig in and stop moving, so be it. Hiradoumi keeps coming though, and bap, hands straight to the face. I think I might call this the bully push. Guys push each other's heads from the side all the time, but dead on the nose? This is playground level nasty. For Aonishiki, the moment is now about digging in and fighting. He's got a hand in his face, but his left is planted solidly on Hiradoumi's jaw. As usual, he attacks the pushing arm, coming up from underneath and striking the triceps and rear of the shoulder. Here's more of a core sumo concept. A lot of times, if a wrestler bats away an opponent's arm, they'll do it near the elbow. Pushing just above the elbow is generally a better leverage point than like the wrist for getting the opponent turned away or otherwise out of position. The straighter the arm, the easier it is to make this work. This is exactly what Aonishiki did to free himself from Oho's Nodowa in the last match. When Aonishiki starts moving his hand to defend, Hiradoumi's elbow is bent, but the nature of pushing means it's likely gonna straighten out. Aonishiki should be able to do the same thing he did to Oho, but this alternate target, getting his hand under the shoulder, isn't any more effective at defending the push in progress. So why do this? For one, Aonishiki doesn't need to be super effective at getting the hand off him, he just needs to get it off him. A throat hold is harder to dislodge, so putting his hand closer to the elbow was necessary. In this case, a hand on the face has nothing to stick to. It won't take as much pressure for Aonishiki to free himself. Then, once the hand is off him, Aonishiki can step in and keep pressing under Hiradoumi's arm to limit Hiradoumi's ability to push immediately after. Aonishiki does get Hiradoumi's hand off him. He's not able to keep his hand under Hiradoumi's arm for long, but it's long enough to slow Hiradoumi's recovery back to his normal stance. Because of that slight delay, by the time Hiradoumi rotates back towards Aonishiki, the Aonishiki missile is incoming. In this position, Hiradoumi is probably best off hitting Aonishiki's shoulders and delaying, but his aggression dial is stuck at 10, so he gets his arms down and in, aiming for the body. Now we introduce Aonishiki's 3-step process to total control. Step 1. Beat Hiradoumi to the spot and spear him in the chest. Step 2. Enjoy both the expression Hiradoumi makes just before he gets hit and when he gets hit. Step 3. Take advantage of Hiradoumi handing you both of his arms and pinch them in, rendering them helpless. Look at this arm position Aonishiki gets. Usually, if a wrestler wants to lock up his opponent's arm, he needs to either wrap his own arm around it or take the belt with the opponent's arm stuck inside. But Aonishiki catches Hiradoumi's left coming in so cleanly, he gets his forearm in under the extended elbow and his hand under the triceps. It's essentially a mini armbar. We can't see the other side, but he has to have good control over there as well, given how Hiradoumi's struggling to get out. Aonishiki could probably use this position to attack the belt, but even if he succeeded, he might end up with less control than he has now. Hiradoumi's not out of tricks though. He tilts to his left. Aonishiki tries hanging on rather than shifting his feet. Unfortunately, his stance is a little narrow, and more importantly, he's open to the side where Hiradoumi is trying to pull him. That helps Hiradoumi get the better of this, forcing Aonishiki's right foot into a side hop to maintain balance. This both keeps Aonishiki from pushing and loosens his grip, giving Hiradoumi a chance to pull his wrist free. As we've seen in other fights, Aonishiki immediately reacts. He knows his opponents will escape whatever he's doing to him eventually, but he's very good at holding positions until the opponents actively defend, since that defense usually gives him the initiative to keep attacking. In this case, he just releases Hiradoumi's left arm and goes for a high push. However, Hiradoumi's defensive tilt throws Aonishiki off more than it may have initially seemed. In slow-mo, this step forward with his right foot looks pretty controlled. At speed though, even replay speed, it's easier to see how he needs the double step to get there, which means he's not completely stable. Since he can't effectively get the push out there without this stability, he's a step behind Hiradoumi's escape. Hiradoumi gets his forearm on Aonishiki's head, complete with hand wrapped over the ear. This is a pull-down stance, and even with Aonishiki being so strong against pull-downs, it makes some sense here. The main reason is it's less likely to be a pull-down and more of a pull past. Hiradoumi's momentum is already heading to his left thanks to the lean that threw Aonishiki off balance, and his left hand is on Aonishiki's body. If he can scoot around Aonishiki's front leg, he could get Aonishiki near the Tawara and have a strong ring position. Instead, Hiradoumi's hand comes down, and instantly it's back up again. It's a feint, yet Aonishiki doesn't even react to it. My initial reaction was, damn, he read that perfectly, but in retrospect I'm pretty sure that was wrong. In fact, my initial impression of the whole sequence may have been wrong. Look at this moment and put yourself in Aonishiki's mawashi. His head is down. He can see Hiradoumi's arms, maybe his right foot. Hiradoumi's left arm should be blocking sight of his left foot. Hiradoumi's right hand goes out and up. It's going over Aonishiki's head, which means it has to be targeting the top of his head. There's nowhere else that makes sense. If Hiradoumi tries a pull down, he doesn't have space to go straight back. He has to get out of the way, which means he has to go to his left, Aonishiki's right. Aonishiki almost instantly swings his right arm up. By the time Hiradoumi's arm is on his head, his hand is on Hiradoumi's shoulder. If Hiradoumi tries the move that looks like it's coming, Aonishiki has him blocked off. It won't work. Which is why, after going through this a bunch of times, I don't think this was a feint at all. Again, when Hiradoumi touches Aonishiki's head, Aonishiki's hand is on his shoulder. Hiradoumi's not a robot, he understands the sport too. Considering the whole sequence, it looks like the head tap is a reaction to Aonishiki blocking his escape. He knew better than to try to power through it, so he gave up the attempt immediately and just tried to get his hands out in front of him to stay in the fight. Plus, if it was an intentional feint, it's really hard to see what the follow-up was supposed to be. In any case, Hiradoumi defends himself well in a tough situation. He takes the push and stabilizes, looping his right hand inside out to block away Aonishiki's left. Aonishiki's right hand finds Hiradoumi's elbow. One more time, Aonishiki attacks the arm to limit the opponent's push. When Hiradoumi tries pushing with that arm anyway, Aonishiki's in position to push it in immediately. Even powering through the control, Hiradoumi can only stand Aonishiki up a little bit. And then a miracle of circumstance. Between Hiradoumi's inside-out block and Aonishiki's parry, Aonishiki's torso rotates pretty far to the left. More importantly, there's enough force in the rotation that his feet have to adjust to balance him. This leaves precisely the moment Hiradoumi needs for a shoulder charge, and Aonishiki gets blasted in a way we rarely see. Even when the big boys bang him back, he rarely gets jolted this hard. The only thing that even relatively mutes the impact is that Aonishiki somehow sneaks his left hand onto Hiradoumi's belt and uses Hiradoumi to keep himself from going any further. If the belt grab stuffing his charge wasn't bad enough for Hiradoumi, Aonishiki gives the belt a yank and pulls him off balance. This opens Hiradoumi's neck and upper chest for a push and lets Aonishiki work into a side position. Remember in the last match where Aonishiki gave up side position to maintain centrality in the ring? Here he keeps working around to Hiradoumi's side because as he's doing so, he's staying in the center of the ring. As Hiradoumi tries whatever he can think of to free himself, Aonishiki slides with him. This should be it. Instead, it leads to the wildest sequence of the fight. First, Hiradoumi doesn't just let Aonishiki cement control of the belt. Before Aonishiki's right hand lands, Hiradoumi turns into a throw. Technically speaking, the throw isn't great. His right arm isn't all that far around Aonishiki's left, and Aonishiki even loops his left leg around Hiradoumi's right, negating Hiradoumi's ability to work that leg into the throw. Even acknowledging the difficulty of Hiradoumi's position, it's fabulous defense from Aonishiki. Next, as Hiradoumi keeps pulling, Aonishiki releases the left hand belt grip. His hand is too close to his own body for the hold to be effective. One option is to try and retake the belt further around Hiradoumi's back, but with Hiradoumi tilting away from him, he may not be able to do much with it. Instead, he wraps his arm high across the back. As he gets his hand up there, Hiradoumi not only doesn't give up the throw, he partially lifts Aonishiki's left leg. Doomed as this might look, Hiradoumi is still making a little progress. Aonishiki reacts by releasing the front grip. Look at the balance. His left leg gets pulled out to the side and he instantly lets his right hand float out to counterbalance. So many wrestlers hang onto the belt and have their grip used against them in throws. Aonishiki's willingness to release the belt as soon as holding on is a bad idea is a very underrated quality of his. Then, no sooner do Aonishiki's leg and arm go out than he pulls him back in again. He gets his right hand high on Hiradoumi's chest and pulls his left leg in with enough power to turn Hiradoumi's throw into his own trip attempt. Hell, even that's an understatement. Hiradoumi's more stuck to Aonishiki's leg than a kid shitting his pants on Santa's lap. Now it has to be over. Aonishiki's pushing on Hiradoumi's chest, he has the belt all the way around the back, and Hiradoumi's leg is kicked up higher than a rocket's. Hiradoumi's one current goal in life is to get his ass away from Aonishiki's leg so he doesn't get flipped on his head. And because Hiradoumi has zero chill, he somehow pulls it off. He gets around Aonishiki and thwarts the trip. He even creates space between them. In another world, against another opponent, maybe Hiradoumi finds a miracle win here. But it's this world, and it's a fight with Aonishiki, already arguably the most adaptable wrestler in sumo. So, with his control slipping and Hiradoumi's headlock pulling him down, Aonishiki hits him with the ABS, the accidental ball snatch. There is no escaping this maneuver, and Hiradoumi is swiftly deposited off the side of the dohyo. The official Kimarite for this one was Yori Taoshi, which is just a Yorikiri where the opponent falls down. I think it should have been something less common to keep with the spirit of the fight. Or, hell, make an entirely new Kimarite. Google Translate says Boru Gurabu is Japanese for ball grab. Sounds good to me, but this win ran Aonishiki's record to 8-1, so I'm sure he couldn't give a shit. I know we're only 9 fights in, but that's most of the long ones. Tamawashi was up on day 10. The last time these two fought, Tamawashi went straight at Aonishiki, banged heads, and Aonishiki just ate hands until he could get inside. Aonishiki may have been 2-0 against Tamawashi going into this matchup, but Tamawashi is one of the main guys that's made me say Aonishiki needs a better long-term strategy than taking shots to the chops. This time Aonishiki makes an adjustment at the start. Last time he came in low, took a direct headbutt, and couldn't get his hands on Tamawashi's body at a useful angle. That led him to getting pushed up and back and nearly got him beat. Here he starts a little more upright. That might seem like it makes him a better target, but it also allows him to get his hands higher, pushing Tamawashi's shoulders back and reducing the force of the initial headbutt. It actually makes a ton of sense. However, he's not the only one adjusting his tachi-ai. Tamawashi usually starts with his right foot forward leading into a big right push. This time he leads with the left. So even though he brings his head into a straight collision with Aonishiki's, he's already stepping off. This gives him position after the initial head bonk to push Aonishiki aside by the shoulder. All of this is very sensible. When they fought in September, Tamawashi couldn't have asked for a better attack off the start, and he still lost. That makes this a good time to throw a wrinkle in the game plan. Plus, this wrinkle attacks the right hand throat hold Aonishiki likes to take off the jump. From this position, it should be simple for Tamawashi to shove him out of it. What Tamawashi apparently didn't realize is the sheer strength of Aonishiki's nodowa. Tamawashi's got his body weight leaning into the shoulder push. Aonishiki's only pushing with his right arm and a good base. Somehow, that's enough for Aonishiki to hold ground while Tamawashi slides back. Even with his hand braced against Tamawashi's jaw, it's kinda unbelievable he's able to hold this position. After that, Aonishiki steps in and there's a head-to-head standoff. Aonishiki gets his left hand on top of Tamawashi's shoulder and leaves it there, then wraps his right hand around to get it over top of Tamawashi's left. He may not make much ground with a push, but by forcing Tamawashi to work from underneath, he's limited what Iron Man can do as well. And that plays out in the next few moments. Tamawashi tries pushing Aonishiki's body from underneath, then gets his hands under Aonishiki's elbows to push them up. As soon as he dials back the aggression to defend himself though, Aonishiki gives Tamawashi's right wrist a good yank and throws him off balance. Tamawashi only staggers a step, but that's all Aonishiki needs to get in, start pushing, and drive Tamawashi out. This looked easy, but that's mainly due to Tamawashi's strategy failing and giving up the initiative. I imagine Aonishiki expected to have to battle through another push attack and wanted that locked out arm at the start to try to keep the attack from starting. If Tamawashi's planned parry had worked as designed, it's fair to think Aonishiki would have still found a way to win, but the parry's failure created an immediate static position. In those spots, Iron Man turns into sitting duck. Aonishiki just had to create an opening for himself. Day 11. Just when everything was looking so good. Obviously, Yoshinofuji had shown himself to be dangerous against Aonishiki. Anyone who chalked this up as a gimme for Aonishiki was not paying attention. That being said, Yoshi's first win in the matchup was in May 2024 when they were each 5-0 in Makushita. His win in a tough fight booted Aonishiki out of the title race, which Yoshi then lost to Fuji Seiyun. That's not important for this breakdown, it's just wild when we think about where they're all at now. And of course, the second win was back in July, forcing Aonishiki out after spinning him to the Tawara with a great setup. But Aonishiki's Makuuchi career has been filled with losses to top-end guys, followed by figuring them out and beating them again and again. He's got to do the same to Yoshi, right? I imagine that'll be true eventually, but not yet. The Tachi is pretty normal for Aonishiki, heads down, hands up. Yoshi takes an approach similar to Kirishima's, putting his head to Aonishiki's side, swinging up with the left hand. Aonishiki leans in, dropping his weight onto Yoshi's drive as best he can. Like most of Aonishiki's opponents, no matter how they position initially, Yoshi goes up while Aonishiki stays down. From Aonishiki's perspective, this is so far so normal. It's difficult to push through him in this position, but Yoshi is someone with the power to potentially get it done. So when Yoshi makes his big push, Aonishiki blocks his right arm out to the side and swings his own right down and around. Once again, he's targeting under the arm. But it's a setup. Look how much closer Yoshi's left hand is to Aonishiki than Aonishiki is to getting under his arm. Back up the tape. Usually, if guys swing an arm out like Yoshi does here, it's with a lot of effort and a big move. In this case, Yoshi only moves it until Aonishiki's arm disconnects from his, then it's coming straight in. To be clear, wrestlers don't do the big swing because they're dumb and put way more energy into moves than they need to. They get the swing going because if they want to go into Supari, the hand strikes, they're taught to get their arms moving and swing into the attack to maximize force. Intriguingly, the guy perhaps most famous for this style, our beloved Tochimaru, often jams his hands out there as fast as he can without those big swings. It's fun to watch and it looks effective, but he is still stuck in Makushita. Maybe I should do a Tochimaru breakdown. It'd be a lot shorter. No, back to the point. Yoshi's a big, strong dude, but he's not so off the charts powerful that he can yeet Aonishiki out of the ring with this short little push. What it does, however, is slide Aonishiki back. It's not much. Aonishiki's right hand still lands on Yoshi's body. However, that slight extra distance, combined with Yoshi beating him to the punch, means that when he swings the hand up to catch Yoshi's arm and control it, for the moment he needs to get inside, he whiffs. As that happens, Yoshi's got the swing going on his right side. Aonishiki's kept up over there, so as Yoshi's hand gets near his face, Aonishiki gets in and pinches the arm. Forward a bit, and Aonishiki is completely on top of Yoshi's right hand. Not only that, he nailed the hand-to-hand block on Yoshi's left. With their relative positioning and Aonishiki's expression, it looks like Yoshi's about to throw him around, but we're 11 fights into the breakdown. By now, we know that Aonishiki being in this position is downright normal. What's not normal is this. Yoshi puts everything into this right-handed shove, and it works. Yes, having his hand under the chin gives him a great pushing surface, but remember, Aonishiki had his arm pinched. He had to power through both that and Aonishiki's very forward position to pull this off. Aonishiki is obviously not prepared for this and ends up with his right foot back. In and of itself, this stance is fine. The issue is, when he gets pushed, he steps back with his right, then his right again, trying to stay steady. This double step shows he intended to keep his right foot forward, but the power and upward angle of Yoshi's push sent him off course. The double step also slows his recovery, so when he finally gets down into a defensive stance, Yoshi's next push is already incoming. When the push lands, Aonishiki is desperately grabbing at whatever he can and it doesn't do much. But he's still really hard to get out. That big double-handed push only sends him back a foot to the Tawara. Aonishiki gets his feet up on the hay, leaning into the next attack. He may not like to be on the Tawara, but he does know how to use it. When the final shove comes though, he still can't find a way to defend it, and the forward lean isn't enough to keep Yoshi from taking the fight. Over the course of this breakdown, we've seen Aonishiki make a handful of mistakes and work his way out of trouble. This time, his only error, to the extent it can be considered an error, was not realizing Yoshi would be capable of jacking him up like this with one squinched in arm. I'm curious what his adjustment will be in January. For this one though, all credit to Team Izagahama for coming up with an excellent strategy and to Yoshi for flawlessly implementing it. Just looking at how these two were doing when they met, on top of, who they are, I didn't expect this one to tie for third on the list of Aonishiki's longest matches of the tournament. How did Oshoma manage to be so competitive? The short answer is, he wasn't. So now we need to see why it still took Aonishiki so long to beat him. Aonishiki comes out with the same basic tachi-ai, head low pushing high. But where most opponents drive him back a little bit before he gets set, Oshoma is the one sliding back. Aonishiki comes in, head down, arms out. He's not committing to anything with his hands, just getting closer and ready to react. To counter this, and counter is in big quotes here, Oshoma tries a half-assed pull down. It's a reaction to going backward off the start. Nobody plans for things to go quite like this, so when they do and your opponent is encroaching with his head duct, it can be a reflexive response. And it would make sense against a lot of opponents. Doing it to Aonishiki, however, is a sign that, like Oho, Oshoma doesn't watch the f***ing tape. As such, all he's done is invite Aonishiki in and immediately gets pushed back towards the Tawara. Now, Aonishiki's in a good pushing position. Left hand on chest, right hand around Oshoma's left arm. Yes, it's a one-handed push, but his legs are solidly under him so he can generate sufficient power to make this work. Oshoma tries to stall things out by stepping into Aonishiki, but taking his right foot off the ground is exactly what Aonishiki needs to send him backwards. Once Oshoma's momentum goes the way he wants, Aonishiki shifts his right arm from looped around Oshoma's left, hand on the ribs, to going for the shoulder. As Oshoma hits the hay bales though, he drops his weight, so Aonishiki's hand flops over top of the shoulder without finding good purchase anywhere. A bit unlucky. On the other side, it's hard to see, but because Oshoma's arm is bent at this low angle, it's most likely he's hanging onto Aonishiki's wrist. After Oshoma drops down, Aonishiki's left elbow sticks out. Oshoma's arm is still bent like he's holding the wrist, but if he is, Aonishiki has plenty of ability to free himself. Aonishiki drops his right hand back down to grip Oshoma's triceps. We've seen this before. Control the pushing muscles and it's much harder to push. Once he has that arm, he frees his left hand and has no issue sneaking it all the way around Oshoma's back to get the belt. Oshoma may not be on the verge of losing, but in a technical capacity, he's getting absolutely brutalized. Of course, even though Oshoma's fighting well above his level, he understands he's in trouble. So once he loses control of Aonishiki's wrist, he takes a big step forward with his right foot. Because he starts this step before Aonishiki takes his belt, Aonishiki isn't pressing forward hard enough to stop him from taking back a little ground. And this is a good time to point out something that some of you may have already realized. Aonishiki is so control focused that, at least against opponents where there's enough of a skill gap, the fight can go longer than seems necessary because he will take an actual one step at a time approach to the fight. Like, in doing this breakdown, we're taking things very slowly, explaining moves and tactics in a step-by-step fashion. But that's to help people understand what's happening when guys are moving at full speed, and even disparate moves happen so quickly back to back to back that the wrestlers have to be doing or thinking about multiple things at once. But let's go back to the start of this fight. Aonishiki starts by pushing. That's all. Oshoma goes backwards. Aonishiki reacts by moving in. Again, he doesn't attempt anything else, just taking space. When Oshoma commits to the pull down, Aonishiki follows and takes a pushing position. Only after the push works does he shift his right hand. Oshoma dropping down throws him off, but he still keeps his left hand where it is until his right hand is securely on the triceps. Then the left sneaks in to get the belt. Against better opposition, he needs quicker movement and decision making even when he has the upper hand. Part of how he racks up all these wins is because he can do that just fine. But this ability to slow down and maximize control against lesser opposition is what makes him essentially immune to big upsets, or at least upsets where he makes a mistake that gets him beat. If that lesser foe doesn't come in with a perfect game plan, they are not winning. Continuing with the fight, Aonishiki is focused on taking the belt, so he's not concerned with preventing Oshoma's step forward. As Oshoma lands his right foot, he also wraps his arm around Aonishiki's and brings his left foot up to get a full step away from the Tawara. Simultaneously, Aonishiki wraps up the left arm and bends that way to maximize the pressure on it. When Oshoma follows up with what might charitably be called a throw attempt, Aonishiki barely moves. Actually, that's being a little mean towards Oshoma. He's in a tough situation, so when he's able to go step and make headway with Aonishiki's left arm locked up, that's not a bad time for a throw. And the reason it fails horribly is because of Aonishiki's reaction. Back it up. When Oshoma rotates into the throw, Aonishiki's left hand is locked on the back of his belt and his right arm is high around Oshoma's forearm. This throw, a kotenage, can benefit considerably from an opponent with a good belt grip as their stretched out arm acts as leverage against them. On the other side, Oshoma can also push down on Aonishiki's arm to create even more leverage. So, of course, the moment after the throw starts, Aonishiki lets go of the belt. And the moment after that, he releases Oshoma's forearm. Oshoma needed that leverage to pull Aonishiki into his leg and hopefully use that to flip him over. When that leverage evaporates, he's stuck with his right leg up and Aonishiki just rotating around it. Of course, maybe Oshoma would have expected this if he watched the f***ing tape. Now Aonishiki's got one arm around Oshoma's back and one on his chest. This is not exactly a classic sumo position, but he doesn't rush. He leaves his hands there holding Oshoma in place until his feet are set. Once he's sliding into position, both hands snap in where he wants them to go. Left hand back on the belt, still all the way around Oshoma's back. Right hand flips over on Oshoma's wrist to keep some control on it. The smartest thing Oshoma does is get his head down so it's more to the side of Aonishiki's rather than letting Aonishiki's head press into his jaw. Now there's a pause. Given how in control he's been so far, I wonder if Aonishiki specifically wanted Oshoma to move first and give him something to react to. Regardless of intent, Oshoma does move first, jamming his right arm down and inside of Aonishiki's left. Trying to push one arm inside of an opponent's belt grip is a fairly normal defense, and Aonishiki is leaving a pretty big gap here, so in theory this makes sense. But of course, the fact it's a normal defense isn't what matters, it's what the defense is supposed to accomplish. Normally, it does two main things. One, it gets your arm inside of your opponent so it can reduce the leverage they apply to your belt. Two, it makes it easier to get a belt grip of your own. But Aonishiki's ass is so far back the straight belt grip is nearly impossible, and his bent over position means the only real way to reduce his leverage is to get your arm under his and lift him up. He's already proven capable of resisting that move against almost anyone. Plus, even if someone was strong enough to lift him any useful amount, he'd almost certainly let go of the belt, stay low, and find another attack. If Oshoma had a surprise third option ready, he could change the whole game, but he doesn't. He goes for the belt. Just looking at Aonishiki's left side when Oshoma starts reaching in should make it apparent he won't get there. It's not a good idea, which Oshoma would know if he watched the fucking tape. But there's a reason I'm drawing such close attention to this. When you watch at speed, Oshoma gets so close to taking the belt, it looks like he made a great move to get inside and just couldn't finish the grab. And in reality, that's not at all what happens. Take it step by step. They're in a stalled position. When Oshoma sticks his arm in that gap, Aonishiki slides his left foot forward a bit. This is probably a belated attempt to close off the attack, but Oshoma's arm is already through. Okay, what's next? Well, Oshoma probably wants the belt. Aonishiki can step his foot back, but that'll benefit Oshoma if he tries to push, and as we've covered, Aonishiki doesn't like to lose position in the center of the ring. So, rather than step back defensively and allow Oshoma a somewhat better ring position, Aonishiki steps forward. He straight up invites Oshoma to try and take his belt. The balls on this man. His mawashi must come with an extra pouch installed. Jesus. And it actually screws Oshoma up. Aonishiki steps in as Oshoma reaches, and Oshoma's fingers momentarily jam on his leg. He didn't plan that, obviously, but sometimes when you're clicking at 100%, it looks like 110. Here's the actual plan. Aonishiki swings his leg in for a very quick trip. It's almost like a kick, but he hooks his leg around Oshoma's for a moment, so it is a trip attempt. However, he doesn't plant his foot, nor does he try dragging Oshoma over his thigh, as we've seen against other guys. It's essentially a distraction trying to get Oshoma to overreact, and we know he understands that type of tactic because it's part of his Uchi Muso, smacking the knee to beta reaction. But do you want to know what's really gross about this move? If Oshoma got the belt, if Oshoma succeeded in his goal, Aonishiki would have position on that arm to squeeze it in and go for the trip anyway. Oshoma would have to either let go again or probably get thrown down thanks, in part, to the leverage offered by the belt grab he wanted the whole time. If there was a mercy rule in sumo, they could call the fight right here, but there's not, so we continue. Okay, Oshoma missed the belt and didn't overreact to the trip. Nonetheless, Aonishiki's improved his position. He's gone from Oshoma being bent over him to Oshoma being more upright and having his head in that lovely spot of being jammed into Oshoma's jaw. It looks like Oshoma doesn't like this, pulling his head away from that contact. From the opposite angle though, we can see Aonishiki is pushing with both his head and hand, which helps create the separation. Once Aonishiki gets Oshoma lifted up, he drops his head back down. This next move looks kinda awkward. Aonishiki steps back with his right foot and pulls Oshoma by the belt. That's fine, but it looks like his right hand goes up to Oshoma's head way late. That's because he maintained the chest push this whole time. It's a little hard to see here because it's more zoomed in, but now that we know what's happening, we can track it. Aonishiki drops his head, right hand on chest. His body begins rotating back. Oshoma starts getting pulled down. Right hand still on the chest. Aonishiki's committed to the rotation. Oshoma's pulled into the gap. Right hand still on the chest. Only when Oshoma's been well dragged into the move does Aonishiki swing the right hand up to Oshoma's head. This has to be an absolute mindfuck for Oshoma. He's getting pushed, so he wants to lean into it. When the pull starts, he wants to shift his weight against that. But the push is still happening, so he still wants to resist that. There's two stimuli making him want to move in almost opposite directions. I'm not sure anyone else can apply the necessary push force for this long at this extension to make this idea fly. You cannot prep for this. If you can't avoid the position in the first place, you are screwed. Put all that together, and when he releases the chest push, Aonishiki doesn't have much trouble slingshotting Oshoma by. With his hand on Oshoma's head, he keeps things moving in the desired direction. Oshoma fights to pivot back towards Aonishiki and to his credit manages to face the right direction by the time he's at the Tawara. Bracing on the rope negates Aonishiki's push, but unlike against Takanosho, Aonishiki doesn't let go of the belt. Instead, once his hand comes off Oshoma's face and kills the push, he yanks Oshoma forward into another pulldown. Oshoma gets his feet out in front of him to stall the pull, but that leads to a slip, a tumble, and another Aonishiki win. Going into this one, everyone expected Aonishiki to beat Oshoma, and he did. If you read our posts during the Basho, you may have seen me say that even though Aonishiki kept winning, he didn't look dominant, and this is an example of that. In sumo, dominant victories are generally associated with blowing through dudes. In this case, Aonishiki faced a far inferior opponent and had to keep dosi-doing his ass around to get the win. That, however, does not mean he was in trouble at any point. We can be aware that a fight which looked more difficult than expected is more correctly viewed as simply the method of a wrestler who doesn't mind taking his time to secure a victory. Day 13 against Onosato, and I gotta tell ya, part of me was tempted to just skip this one. Not because it doesn't deserve coverage, but because this and the Wakahenka took a total of 5 seconds, and they'll probably be in half the comments. But for a 3-second fight, there is way more to discuss than I'd have ever guessed. So, strap in. Aonishiki came into this match 0-2 against Onosato just like he did with Yoshinofuji. Unlike with Yoshinofuji, those losses came in the last 2 Bashos, and Aonishiki got absolutely bombed both times. And he just got blasted by Yoshi 2 days prior with a strategy best described as the mini Onosato. Sumo's top Yokozuna once again looked like our protagonist's biggest headache of the tournament. If there was a silver lining in the matchup, it's that Yoshi's first 2 wins came in very different ways, but both of Onosato's were quite similar. Onosato threw Aonishiki back and bulldozed him from there. Now, it's fair to ask, how in the world is this a silver lining? Because if Onosato keeps using the same method of attack, and there's no reason he shouldn't, Aonishiki can potentially try to build a plan around it. That doesn't mean it'll be easy, but it's easier than trying to game plan for someone who keeps beating you in different ways. Okay, since all 3 matches were so short and Onosato is by far Aonishiki's biggest headache, it makes sense to look at how Aonishiki's used his famed adaptability over time to try and climb this mountain. We can actually start pre-fight. In their first meeting, Onosato had his hands down first. Sumo etiquette generally holds that the higher ranked wrestler gets to decide when the fight starts. Just ask Gonoyama and Hoshoryu about that. This is Onosato's norm though. He always has his hands down first if the opponent doesn't beat him there. In September, Aonishiki made a point to get there first, and he wanted to get at Big Man. He leaned forward early and had to pause before the start, so a bit of bad timing there, but it sure looks like what he generally wants to do. Not surprisingly, in November, Aonishiki was at the line several seconds before Onosato with 1 hand down. But then there's a shift. He keeps just 1 hand down, allowing Onosato to get set first. Their first match, when Onosato set first, Aonishiki didn't seem ready for it. Here, Aonishiki obviously is ready. More to the point, he's communicating to Onosato that he has a plan. Is that going to affect Onosato in any tangible way? Unlikely. At the very least, it shouldn't. But regardless of Aonishiki's plan for the fight, I dig the mind game. The question is if there's more than a mind game at work. Aonishiki gets about the best possible start he could to the fight. Frame by frame, his right hand comes down and his left lifts at the same moment the right touches. If he lifted any quicker, it would technically be a false start. Obviously, we've seen enough false starts ignored by the Gyoji to say he could lift quicker and not get called on it, but realistically, this is the fastest 100% legal start possible. At the same time, Onosato's a little late on the jump. It's hardly noticeable at speed, but from the side, it's easier to see how much slower he was in terms of getting forward. Because of that, at first contact, Aonishiki's pretty centered in the ring, whereas Onosato's barely moved his feet. Maybe the mind game really did work. Maybe Onosato was slightly off this day and will never be this slow on the draw again. Regardless, in this fight, Aonishiki starts with outstanding ring position. Coming in, Aonishiki also does something very unusual for him, a feint. His normal tachi is arms out, using them to absorb impact and find a defense against the opponent's initial attack. He tried that in their first fight to essentially no effect. The second time, he angled his arms lower to try holding Onosato up at the body, but Onosato blew it up with the huge forearm push before any resistance could be applied. Here, Aonishiki swipes his right hand inside as a minor distraction, then drops his arms and makes a point to get the left in front of Onosato's right forearm. Finding a way to negate Onosato's right is crucial for a few reasons. First, when Onosato pushes, he prefers to get out there with his right hand. If he's smothered, he can still push effectively leaning into the right forearm. And when he gets space, he likes to get his weight behind the right hand swinging in. Even in their September match, when Aonishiki collapsed on that incoming right, Onosato slung it around his side and used that to help throw him down. If Aonishiki's going to defend anything, it needs to be the right arm. Of course, multiple times in this basho, Aonishiki's used both arms to block the opponent at the start, especially if he expects an initial push. It should make sense to do that against the biggest pusher of all, right? Yet, on the other side, his right hand swings down and in. This is clearly an attempt at the belt. Whether or not it works, it is actually a perfectly good idea. Trying to absorb Onosato's force like he does with everyone else hasn't worked so far. Even if he came into the tournament thinking he'd try a similar tactic, the Yoshi fight should have shown there's a limit to how much pushing force he can handle. With his absurd grip strength, there's nothing wrong with trying to get the belt and hold on rather than just resist with form and body weight. And it looks like he might get it. Alas, the yeet cometh once again, and back Aonishiki goes. Going by foot position, he gets launched about as far this time as in July and September. However, he does a good job maintaining stability and keeping his weight forward. His superior ring position means he's not nearly as close to the Tawara as in previous fights, despite being thrown back a similar distance. And he's still focused on messing with his opponent's arms. Even as he slides back, he keeps his left forearm up against Onosato's right. When he has to abandon the belt attempt, his right hand goes up under Onosato's left arm. He's doing everything he can to alter Onosato's push trajectory and the associated force, and or slow down Onosato's ability to retract his arms for the next attack. It doesn't look like it matters though. This has all the appearances of another blowout. And then, with everything going his way, Onosato's bad habits still find a way to creep in. Watch his left arm. Aonishiki's right hand follows the left but isn't able to stick and control it in any functional way. All Onosato has to do is swing it through for his regular Supari and keep blasting. Instead, he gets in a rush and swipes straight down at Aonishiki's head, pulling it in. No, he doesn't hit reverse, and yes, his next move is to push with his right. But he didn't just hit Aonishiki at an imprecise angle, he pulled Aonishiki closer before getting that right hand in place. His hands are now working at cross purposes, so it was obviously a mistake. And as Aonishiki searches for Onosato's belt, Onosato has zero leverage to push with. We're so used to seeing Aonishiki get pushed, hold stance, and dive back in that it looks like Aonishiki's defensive reaction is the reason this happens, but Onosato 100% did this to himself. Onosato swiftly abandons his push and swings his right arm around Aonishiki's side as Aonishiki's left hand fumbles for the belt. Onosato's hand cinches up here, which says he's looking for Aonishiki's belt. Unfortunately for him, not only is he nowhere near where he needs to be, but Aonishiki is way ahead in that race and loops his fingers under Onosato's mawashi. Just before Aonishiki gets the belt though, Onosato starts moving forward. He doesn't move his feet though. This isn't a step forward. It doesn't look like he wants to move this way. But for everything we've said about Aonishiki's grip strength, he has no grip here and he's not even pulling. Why is this happening? Aonishiki's fingers are around the side of Onosato's torso, so his hand is on the side in front of Onosato's chest. It looks like Onosato might be clamped down on the fingers, but in the next moment his left arm lifts, so that's not the case. Then Onosato lurches forward as Aonishiki takes his belt. It could look like Aonishiki has a grip on Onosato's chest and is pulling him, but let's think about this. Not only does Aonishiki not have the belt when Onosato moves, he hasn't taken a backward step or pivot. He'd have to do this purely on finger strength. His hands are absurdly strong, but that's asking too much. Let's go back to the Oshoma fight. Aonishiki had his hand on Oshoma's chest, baiting him to press against it so he could use it to help his pull. That's what appears is happening here. Rather than hold pressure like he did against Oshoma though, he releases some of the pressure as soon as Onosato leans into it. Onosato, expecting more resistance, unexpectedly throws himself forward. And when Aonishiki gets the belt, he uses that plus Onosato's new forward momentum to drag him into a throw. Now we can see Aonishiki's plan. Step 1, start fast. Step 2, get the belt. Step 3, pull Onosato into a throw. Step 1 worked great, couldn't have been better. Step 2 almost worked, but its initial failure didn't change the ultimate goal. Stay active, look for an opportunity. And when Onosato presented him with one, he pounced. Aonishiki battled to make step 2 a success. Now it's time to make step 3 work, and he knows it can work. Hoshoryu does it all the time, right? But Hoshoryu is Hoshoryu, and Aonishiki, as great as he is not. All things considered, it is a pretty good attempt. He gets his left leg in front of Onosato's right. It's high on Onosato's leg too, which is what you want for a throw. But Aonishiki's not the only wrestler in this ring who knows better than to give the opponent extra leverage to use against him. As soon as Onosato's right leg starts going up, he doesn't directly resist the momentum. Instead, he drops his weight, letting his right leg go a little floppy while his right hand sits loose on Aonishiki's back. He's using enough pressure to push Aonishiki towards the edge, but mostly he's defending the throw. Aonishiki, for his part, reacts pretty well to this. Onosato's defense is to let his weight drop, so the last-ditch pushdown becomes his only hope, and it is what made the fight close. Then of course we have Jumpgate, but that's a referee and judge decision, which is not the point of the breakdown. This is only about how we ended up in a position to argue about the decision ad infinitum. And the critical factor in this fight being this close was Onosato's mini pull. I have no doubt Aonishiki will, if nothing else, find wins in this matchup by pressuring Onosato into mistakes. At this point in their careers though, the gap between their best selves is still significant. In the short term, the variance in this matchup will come from the fact the drop off from Onosato's best day to his worst is much larger than Aonishiki's. Or if Onosato's shoulder becomes a chronic issue. But gods, that would be disappointing. Day 14, time for Yokozuna number 2. If you saw Aonishiki's first 2 wins over Hoshoryu, they looked somewhat similar. The first time he got to Hoshoryu's belt and just hung on, taking advantage of Hoshoryu's injured foot to ride him to the ground. The second, he pulled the move we've already seen a few times in this breakdown, getting to Hoshoryu's left side and yanking him down over his leg. He's given the other Yokozuna a lot to think about when it comes to protecting that belt. So, of course, when they met on day 14, Aonishiki completely ran through him. Hoshoryu's preferred tachi is to come in very upright. He's extremely famous for his throw proficiency, but the change to his sumo that led to Yokozuna level success was using a straightforward power attack more often. As such, his general strategy is to attack with his hands and use that to either blast the other guy out or set up his ability to work on the opponent's belt. Obviously, this approach is quite successful overall. Unfortunately for Hoshoryu, it also plays into Aonishiki's strengths. He used an essentially identical tachi in their first 2 fights, and Aonishiki completely abused it both times. Hoshoryu can be a little stubborn in sticking to his sumo against difficult opponents, but it sure looks like he needs to change something. And in fairness, he does. Instead of coming out firing, he swings his arms down after tapping Aonishiki's head with his knuckles. Give Hoshoryu this. He must be a truly great wrestler because he's a Yokozuna while apparently not watching the f***ing tape either. Aonishiki comes straight in as is usual for him. His left arm is set low and defensive while his right hand goes straight at Hoshoryu's arm. He usually sends that right hand more for the shoulder, so this is slightly different, but not enough to suggest he's taking a clearly different approach here. Against a tachi like Aonishiki's, Hoshoryu bringing his hands low like this is just opening himself up to get popped. Even the replay guy on the telestrator recognizes this. Ever see those car crash tests where they drive straight into the wall? The wall being perpendicular to the ground maximizes the impact. The only difference between these two and those crash tests is that in this case, the car wins. Hoshoryu mostly stands his ground, but that's no good. He wants to be moving forward. He's got nothing here. Aonishiki may have hit his arm rather than his shoulder, but he still transitions into the throat push he likes. His left hand is on Hoshoryu's body, helping the push even more. Hoshoryu tries pushing up on Aonishiki's right elbow, but the arm's bent and the nodowa is locked in, so that's doomed. It's so bad that Hoshoryu transitions to a pull down, and whether he watches the tape or not, he knows this isn't where he wants to be. Even here though, Aonishiki beats him to the punch. Just before the pull down attempt, Aonishiki gets his left hand around to the back of the belt. He gets a little stretched out, but he's able to use the grip to hang on and get around to Hoshoryu's side. Even when Hoshoryu hits the Tawara and tries to face him, Aonishiki's belt grip and right hand push denies the turn and powers him out. I'm guessing Aonishiki and his coach based their strategy on Hoshoryu using the same start as usual. Thanks to Hoshoryu's adjustment, it worked even better than they could have imagined. Day 15. Onosato's out, so Hoshoryu's automatically in the lead. Aonishiki has to win this to force a playoff. But Kotozakura's win over Onosato the day before secured Koto his Kachikoshi, so even though we should expect a good effort from the Ozeki, he's not in desperation mode. Or so you'd think. At this point in the breakdown, we know Aonishiki's tachi. Stays low, head towards Koto's chest. The right hand's up towards Koto's shoulder, no doubt ready to try for the nodowa. The left lands on Koto's right elbow, attacking the arm as usual. Credit has to go to Koto here. We've seen a number of Aonishiki's opponents come in with that right forearm bent and try to power through his tachi. Koto, however, gives Aonishiki a target, then loops the arm around free and clear. Aonishiki used essentially the same left-hand placement to trap Koto's arm inside in their last 2 fights, so it's good to see Koto pull a move to avoid it. Of course, there's the question of what Koto planned as a follow-up. The logical goal is to go for Aonishiki's belt, but he's not even close, and it's hard to imagine he thought that might work. After his hand goes around the world, it lands on Aonishiki's face, but only after Aonishiki pushes him back. Yet, even at the end of his range, he's able to crank Aonishiki's head to the side. Now, imagine that after he dodged Aonishiki's left, he went directly for the face. Even if you assume the momentum of his arm swing was too strong to be instantly stopped, he absolutely could have gotten a shove on the side of Aonishiki's head. If he can do this with essentially just his hand and wrist, what could his push accomplish with all his weight behind it? Look, I'm not picking on Koto for being a dummy or anything like that. We've already discussed classically trained sumo wrestlers learn to loop their arms into pushes as a normal part of training. Aonishiki swings his arms too, but broadly speaking, he's quick and direct with his movements more often than his opponents. And in this case, that big looping movement directly negates an opening that was available. Koto, along with some other guys, may need to break out of habits like this to have a real shot at beating the new Ozeki. Alright, moving on. Aonishiki pushes his left forearm up into Koto's right, trying to shake loose from the face push. At the same time, he swipes his right hand up where Koto's left arm would be if Koto kept pushing. Koto, however, shows excellent awareness and holds it back, and the right hand fully whiffs. That's twice now Koto worked around Aonishiki's strategy of attacking his opponent's arms. In a sport where outcomes can be determined by millimeters, this should offer Koto some kind of opening to take advantage of. But Aonishiki gives him nothing. As soon as he's free of the face push, he dives in. Koto gets his right hand on Aonishiki's left arm, then his own left comes around for the belt. If he'd been able to maintain pressure on Aonishiki's right, he may have held Aonishiki in place just long enough to secure the belt. But it was just a tap, likely a feint, and Aonishiki's able to swing his hips away from that grasping left hand. For Aonishiki's part, he's just doing his sumo. He evades the belt grab and gets his left hand up to push. Part of his hip movement in keeping his belt safe is stepping back with his right foot, and when it touches the ground, he drives in. He's got Koto moving backwards, so maintain pressure. That's the goal. In an unfortunate bit of timing for Aonishiki, as he steps in, Koto plants his forearm and pushes with both that and his left hand. It's a little ridiculous that even though the push gets Aonishiki swinging his arms around to maintain balance, Koto also slides back. He takes advantage as best he can, but having to cover the extra distance means Aonishiki's recovered by the time he's within reach. Aonishiki throws out a quick slap, then buries his head into Koto's left arm and goes for the belt. He's way in there. This is straight giving up his belt on the opposite side, and he knows it. It's a more committal move than we really ever see from him. And yet, he reaches out, doesn't even get far enough to get to a part of Koto's belt not blocked by that thick-ass leg, then abandons it to take control of Koto's wrist. Slow it all down. Aonishiki reaches. Koto's arm is in his way. He can't quite get there. Pulls back. Then he moves his hand in, thinking he might go for the belt in front. But as he makes that move, Koto takes his belt, so he immediately switches to wrist control. At speed, we can see his hand twitches inward before sliding back. That's how we know he didn't plan to go defensive right after the first attempt at Koto's belt failed. As Aonishiki takes the wrist, he forces his upper body down. This is not a UBD, only his upper body moves. He's trying to get his head under Koto's and does. Then, squeezing Koto's right wrist, he's able to slide Koto back a half step. But Koto's still got an absolutely dominant belt grip, and even though Aonishiki could make this work against a lot of opponents, it should be extremely difficult for him to find a win from here. In short, as hard as he's working, this looks like a giant oopsie. Until, that is, we switch cameras. Restart the sequence. Aonishiki dives his head in. Koto's already reaching, but Aonishiki's head bashes into his and brings him up short. When Koto recovers though, he's got direct line of sight over Aonishiki's shoulder to that irresistible belt.
Oh god, it's so good.
He snatches it up. Aonishiki brings his left arm back. Aonishiki steps out to his left so he can really get bent over Koto's arm. Koto drops down with him, but as we know, Aonishiki achieves the lower head position. When he lifts up, forcing Koto up with him, his right hand comes into view. Out, around, and straight for Koto's waist. At speed, bam! We don't see the hand again because he got the belt. Lest we begin to overstate Aonishiki's strategic brilliance, this was not a six-dimensional chess strategy to fake the left hand belt grab and snag the right. He just didn't get there on the left. But Aonishiki's ability to apply real power from some very awkward positions means he's always got some kind of de facto backup plan. Some guys can get way down and stay stable, some can apply a lot of upward pressure if they get their head on their opponent's jaw. But Aonishiki is the only one who can do both this effectively. Not only does that make him uniquely dangerous, it's also much harder for a wrestler to use their experience against anyone else to inform their strategy against him. Knowing Aonishiki got the belt, it's clearer to us that he's not pushing Koto back here. Koto pulls in a vain attempt to break free. It doesn't work, Aonishiki's still locked in, and Koto's got very little space behind him. So the Ozeki just walks forward. Koto catches a lot of hell for not winning like people think an Ozeki should, but don't underestimate the raw power he can bring to bear. Koto lifts Aonishiki by the belt and under the arm, and Aonishiki steps back because he knows he's not going to dig in and stop this. He still drops his hips and tries to stay forward after that though, because if he doesn't, he'll give up his central ring position. And we all know how important the center of the ring is. It doesn't work. Koto bangs Aonishiki's leg with his own and sends him back. With one huge power move, Kotozakura snatches the center of the ring from Aonishiki. However, even though it looks like Koto stole the momentum, he has to recover his balance. The leg bump brought his weight too far forward, and he has to step back with his left to stabilize. Aonishiki does not miss this opportunity to send Koto right back in the direction he came from. He forces Koto's right foot back before the left is planted, and it takes half the ring for Koto to find his footing again. Central control, back to Aonishiki. Somewhere in this push, Koto loses his belt grip. He has it here, it looks like he lets it go right after. I'm not sure why, it seems like he could have held on, but the point is, it's gone. Being free from belt control, Aonishiki immediately steps left and tries to double up his belt grip. He can't get it, but he transitions back to arm control. His right hand still attached to Koto's belt like a wolverine on a stake. This has gone from surprisingly good to quite bad for Koto in 2 seconds, but his power turns things once again. After Aonishiki misses the belt, he tries stomping his foot back down, but he can't. Kotozakura prevents Aonishiki from getting his left foot down through nothing other than the power of his own right arm holding him up. He's even able to force Aonishiki back a step before he recovers and snatches up the back of the belt again to boot. It's looking pretty good. And then, yoink. Just like with Wakamotoharu, Aonishiki steps out, hits a proper Yukane booty drop, and pulls Koto off balance before ever touching Koto's knee. This is where I might have made a mistake with my commentary during the Basho. Koto's leg slides back immediately on contact, so I thought he shifted his leg as a reaction to the touch, and that flinch sent him off balance. However, what it looks like after watching it a couple dozen times is that even though Aonishiki's contact is light, that right leg is so poorly balanced that even minimal contact could have knocked his leg out from under him. Basically, I assumed that even Koto's bad leg could withstand a relative tap, and now I believe that was probably an error. If what I'm saying now is true, then if Koto ends up in this position again, he needs to get low regardless of the discomfort. And if his damaged knee simply can't bend any further, then he'll always be vulnerable to this move if Aonishiki can get to this spot. That's the final regulation win. On to the playoff. Alright, the Yusho's on the line, and Hoshoryu's gotten wrecked 3 straight times by Aonishiki. Like, these were not mere defeats. These were the kinds of beatdowns that 20,000 years ago would make you lose leadership of the tribe. His first strategic adjustment utterly bombed. What's the next one gonna be? Adopt the original approach, of course. More or less. Let's watch. The Tachi-ai. Aonishiki's got his arms out, but just absorbs the force and stays in tight. His left locks onto Hoshoryu's ribs, Hoshoryu's right hand is high to push out, left hand low to push up. Right foot forward, he rotates in and gets a big ol' shove on Aonishiki's face. Aonishiki lifts his left forearm to knock it away, but as he raises up, he also gets a good push in. Hoshoryu only slides back a couple inches, but backwards is still backwards. On the upside for Hoshoryu, he swings his right arm away from Aonishiki's block pretty quickly. The opposite angle is very zoomed in, but we can see at the same time Hoshoryu throwing Aonishiki's hand off his face. So Hoshoryu got slid back, but he's getting more of what he wants with his hands. It's a fairly even start. Hoshoryu swipes down with the right, but Aonishiki gets his arm out of the way. Both drop and engage. Each one's thinking about the other's belt at first, but Hoshoryu's got the inside arm position, so Aonishiki instantly switches to defense. Hoshoryu's got no interest in letting Aonishiki hang on to any part of his arm, even the wrist, and pulls his hand free. But at this angle, we're missing the most important part of what's happening. We can't see Aonishiki's right hand, but it's planted on Hoshoryu's chest. What we do see is Hoshoryu's hand here around Aonishiki's triceps. We've talked about times when Aonishiki does something similar to reduce his opponent's pushing ability, but he's usually closer to the elbow. Hoshoryu's hand is almost at Aonishiki's armpit. This does not offer as much control. Aonishiki's arm is still mostly free to move. This will help us understand the next sequence. Once Hoshoryu's hand is free, he hits reverse and goes for a pull down. He tried a pull down in their regulation match because he was stuck and desperate. Here it looks like he's in a position where he doesn't need to do something he knows at best is a low percentage move. But when Aonishiki lands his left hand on Hoshoryu's chest, and knowing the right hand is already there, now we can grasp how Hoshoryu probably felt under real physical pressure. And at a glance, it doesn't look like a bad pull down attempt. Aonishiki's head goes to Hoshoryu's side, which means his energy isn't centered on Hoshoryu's body. Hoshoryu gets free of Aonishiki's left hand. Aonishiki doesn't have his belt either, like in their match the previous day. But I am still calling this an unplanned desperation maneuver. Here's why. When a wrestler goes for a pull down, unless they go straight backwards, they want to open up their hips to face where they want their opponent to fall. In this case, Hoshoryu's right foot is far forward. He needs to switch stances for this pull down to have any chance of working. But he doesn't. Or more likely, he can't because Aonishiki's right hand prevents him from pivoting. Either way, this turns into a crossbody pull-down attempt, which is just not a thing. It's not a thing against anyone, and it's definitely not a thing against Aonishiki. That inability to pivot lets Aonishiki take side position on Hoshoryu for the 4th time in 4 meetings. Then he adds insult to injury by getting all the way around his back to secure the Yusho. The most positive spin for Hoshoryu is that the pull-down might have worked reasonably well, but like so many of Aonishiki's opponents, he didn't realize Aonishiki was capable of controlling him at this way off balance angle of contact. Even then though, we've seen Hoshoryu in a lot of tough fights where he battled through an opponent's attack. Going for an all-in pull-down when Aonishiki gets his first real push started? Well, it has shades of Abi creeping in. For those very new to the sport, or those who just didn't notice, Abi beat Hoshoryu 5 straight times from September 2024 through July 2025. They also split the 4 previous fights. Prior to that, Hoshoryu was 9-2 in the head-to-head. He was always better than Abi, and during Abi's run of success against him, Hoshoryu was the one who improved more overall. But he couldn't buy a win until Abi's arms imploded in September. He consistently looked out of sorts and at a loss for what to do. It looks like Aonishiki is putting him in that same state of mind. Hoshoryu is more than capable of handling a difficult position. Even if he doesn't win, he can put up a fight. But Aonishiki has dominated him so thoroughly that he looks like he's lost confidence in his base skill set to get anything done. Maybe this shows he's willing to experiment with a dubious tactic to try and stall Aonishiki's momentum, but in a playoff for a Yusho, I have my doubts. That's what Aonishiki does to people. He doesn't just bring a new wrinkle to sumo. He's on a different level with his moveset, his decisiveness, his technical proficiency, his surprising overall power, and especially his power at ridiculous angles. Even a Yokozuna who, on paper, should create a fun and interesting challenge has wound up becoming Aonishiki's biggest victim. And even though sumo tactics constantly evolve, especially between opponents who see each other all the time, Aonishiki's learned so fast that he might stay ahead of the curve a while longer. So, that's Aonishiki's November 2025 Yusho packed into the largest of nutshells. But there's still one obvious question. Does any of this give a clue as to how his opponents might take him down? First of all, that coach who said maybe his opponents should get to the line first and not let him set up for the Tachi, I don't think he's wrong, but it's definitely insufficient. I can't imagine that costing him more than a win or two before he figures out a way to nullify the strategy. Broadly speaking, I can only think of one approach that might be even semi-reliable: break his posture. Some of you, especially the more veteran fans, might think that's a bit too broad. Apart from picking Midori Fuji up and carrying him out of the ring, breaking a wrestler's posture is almost necessary to win a match. But that's kinda why I bring it up. It's so normal that we stop thinking of it as an actual goal. Then when Aonishiki comes along and is incredibly difficult to posture break, we're left wondering how the hell anyone can beat him, aside from the few guys he's still trying to figure out and the natural variance of the sport. The first question then is, what's the posture we're trying to break? It's this, his L stance. Sometimes you can catch him in a more neutral stance. For example, against Oho, when he made this ill-timed attempt for the belt, his feet were more side by side than he'd normally want. This left him open to getting shot backwards. This stance is easier to take advantage of though, so the only suggestion here is to watch for such an opening. Top-level Rikishi should be able to do something with it. In this L stance though, he's almost immovable. He can be pushed back, but usually slowly enough that he has time to improve his ring position. The most effective method of breaking this that we've seen has come from huge pushers. Onosato and Yoshinofuji are the most obvious recent examples. Daisho did the same thing a couple times, but their last match was in May, and Aonishiki's figured some things out in the interim. With Daisho back in the mix, we'll have to see if Aonishiki's improvements and/or Daisho's injury swings that matchup. Takayasu also did a lot of work in November despite eventually losing. And the Takayasu match might be the most telling. He attacked with hand strikes rather than the more standard push. Wrestlers tend to prioritize pushing because they want to take advantage of whatever forward momentum they can build. Pushing applies a more consistent pressure, so it's much better at using momentum than striking. But Aonishiki don't give a fuck about your momentum. If you're Onosato or Yoshinofuji or even Hakuoho and you push so hard even he can't stand in against it, great, push. Otherwise, don't push, strike. Or push early, then start striking. When he's across from you in the ring, don't overthink, don't over-strategize, just blast him. He's got that excellent hand accuracy and will make this difficult by hitting your arms and armpits, but if you keep swinging, he has more hands to defend and is more pressured to keep up or find a way to turn it around. Takayasu made his life absolute hell this way. Yes, Takayasu is singularly powerful, but getting smacked in the face and chest at a high frequency by anyone sucks, and having to break through someone trying to smack you in the face and chest at a high frequency also sucks. Of course, even if smaller guys are able to give him trouble this way, it may not be enough to win. Whether they try it or not then, they have more work to do. There are all kinds of methods for wrestlers to try and off-balance an opponent, and we cannot possibly cover them all. This video's already long enough. Even if we look at specific matchups, different guys like Wakamotoharu and Ura will have very different ways of pulling this off. But we can talk about what's worked in the past and still theoretically could. Number 1, you gotta pressure him. Granted, this is easier to do with power. Takayasu's July win against Aonishiki included consistent pulling up on the body, forcing Aonishiki to use his energy to keep himself low. Yoshi won in July by never letting Aonishiki get settled even when Aonishiki successfully knocked him back. This is also why the big pushes work so well on the Tachi-ai. They have to start in a neutral stance, which gives opponents a chance to pop Aonishiki before he solidifies his L stance. But Wakamotoharu's September win was a different application of pressure. Even when Aonishiki took his belt early, he kept walking forward. That allowed him to get a double belt grip. This was crucial, but let's pause here and bring in idea number 2. Get him moving laterally. I don't mean laterally like sidestepping. Maybe that'll work, but his footwork is pretty good, so I have my doubts. I mean force him to deal with lateral pressure when he wants to dig in and get his weight forward. Takayasu did this somewhat accidentally. When they achieved this static position, Takayasu's pressure prompted Aonishiki to defend by bringing his front foot way forward. Takayasu lifting Aonishiki wasn't intended to make Aonishiki lean to his right, or at least it doesn't appear so. The fact he was lifting Aonishiki's left side forced him that way because physics. But with his feet so split, when his front foot was forced to move, his rear was stuck compared to if he was in a more balanced stance. Hiradoumi though made that happen more purposefully. No, I don't think he saw the Takayasu match and planned this out, because no sane person would plan to jam their arms into Aonishiki's vice grip. But his reaction to lean to the side threw Aonishiki's balance off despite the fact he was in a terrible position to apply any real power. If he, or anyone, was able to manage this while in more control, they might be able to get some work done. And returning to Wakamotoharu's win, he's got the double belt grip. Aonishiki steps around him. Once they're here, Wakamotoharu stuffs the throw. Aonishiki sorta goes for the Uchi Muso, although this is more of a desperation fake out. The actual move cannot work from here. Then Waka gets to Aonishiki's right side, then his left, then his right. Yes, Aonishiki's pulling him around as well, but the takeaway is, Waka is not just trying to straight push. He controls Aonishiki and basically wiggles him side to side to back him out. By the way, remember way earlier in the video when we covered their November match, I said wrestlers usually move around with controlled steps? This is what I mean. Given the outcome of this one, it's a little easier to understand Aonishiki powering out of a similar position this time, right? So, TLDR, if you're a joy level Rikishi and you're having trouble beating Aonishiki, keep the pressure up, stay high energy, make him move off the line he's trying to hold. If he's in his L stance, get him moving side to side. If you catch him in a neutral stance, go straight at him. Perfect these strategies and you too might beat Aonishiki once in every 4 or 5 tries. I mean, all I can see are the openings. I don't know what to do with them. Plus, the dude is a ridiculous athlete. There's no promise of glory here. I'm just trying to give you a chance. And that, all of that, is the breakdown for one wrestler in one tournament. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I hope for both, really. Remember, Aonishiki mugs are on sale now, and leave a comment if you'd like either image on another type of item. And now's when I point to the subscribe button for the people who haven't clicked it yet. Tier list soon, and I'll schedule the community tier list livestream as soon as I'm sure of when I can do it. Keep an eye out for those, have a great day, and I'll see you soon.